This video will be more of a podcast, so you don't have to watch it like a video, you can just listen to it. We've recorded this around a month ago with my friend Andreas from the Witcher Joker channel, and we talk about the Hexer, which I already covered to some extent in my last video, but here we go more into detail. And just to preface this, I'm pretty bad at talking in English from the top of my head. There's a reason why I'm writing scripts for my videos. When I was editing this, I noticed how long it takes me to express myself and to make a point. It's honestly hard to listen to me struggling with English at many points in this. But the reason why I'm doing this and why I want to start recording podcast episodes regularly is exactly because I know how much I suck at this and I want to get better. And the only way to get better at something I suck at is to do it more and improve with practice. So bear with me, please. But anyway, I haven't recorded the beginning of our discussion with Andreas, so just to provide the context, here at the start of the podcast, I'm talking about how most people saw the god-awful movie version of the Hexer first, and that's why the reception of it was so bad, and a lot of people still don't like it to this day, because of their first reaction to the movie. So let's start the podcast. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this because it always seemed to me that I my reaction was pretty same when I've seen it for the first time. And I actually have to warn people, don't watch short movie version which has like 2 hours. Watch only if you want to watch the Hexer show, watch
The
the
actual
actual
show,
TV
yeah.
the actual TV show,
Yeah,
and
the
it's
problem is also that
Mhm.
I think the first episode with Geralt as a kid is actually decent.
Mhm.
And the problem is the movie doesn't start with any of that. It starts with the one with the golden dragon, and that has the shitty dragon and the crap effects. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's arguably the worst part to start with. So I think that already bets you against the movie. Like you get to that thing and you see the dragon, and you think, "Oh my god, what the hell is this?"
Yeah.
And then you can't really enjoy the rest of the movie anymore. I think the first 2 episodes set a tone, and after that, you're actually interested in the show, and then you don't mind the crap stuff so much more. So I
Mhm.
think the show works better for that reason alone already.
Yeah, and what I don't like is when we can get to that later, but movie like changes stuff even more. Like there are stuff missing from the books, and like the story is changed. So I don't like that. And just do your do yourself a favor if you want to watch this and watch the whole thing in its entirety. Yeah, and yeah, what I wanted to say is that I watched the movie version first because I got it to my birthday or as a birthday gift from my aunt who knew that I like the Witcher stuff. And yeah, it's shit. I was shocked how bad it was. And but then I tried the whole show, and which is better, obviously. And so my view like changed over time, and there are more reasons why. But let's get to the actual stuff about the Hexer. I wanted to mention like the bad stuff first because I agree that like this show, in my opinion, I wouldn't call it good. I definitely see the bad stuff, and I understand why people ridicule it. But yeah, I think it's the hate for it is overblown, or if that's the right word. But yeah, there are definitely things you that are bad, and I don't like either. So I really don't like the visuals. They for some reason decided to make the Witchers look like samurai. Mm. Although I get why you have sort of this. It's sort of like in Star Wars, right? And order of or I don't know if like it's just the Witchers are like this sort of like Jedi. They have meditation stuff, yeah, stuff like that. And
In
the
what
fighting.
sense do you actually think they look like samurai? Mostly because of
Well,
the curved sword, or also for
no,
other reasons?
well, they have the curved sword, and they also have the helmets. Geralt doesn't. They don't wear it all the time. They say I think it's the second episode where he has to fight against one of the
Yeah.
Witchers that still uses the armor, the old armor they don't use anymore. So they have the helmets, and then I know he uses it one more time, I think, and that's clearly it's not like samurai mask, but it's clearly inspired by it. So they are a
It's
bit,
very Eastern looking.
yeah.
It's definitely not medieval European. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, so I don't like that, but to be fair, um I've seen some concept art, like pictures from CDPR, and they had very similar idea of the Witchers. Like on the pictures, the Witcher looked like it has had this Japanese sort of hairstyle or haircut. So yeah.
Yeah. And if you look into the one trailer that they made where they basically summarize what Witchers are, in the typical Witcher 2 art style, like the cutscenes in the game itself, they basically describe them as warrior monks.
Mhm.
And if you describe it like warrior monks, I mean, yeah, where do fighting monks exist? You immediately bring up this idea of this Eastern thing, which obviously the Jedi are also kind of based on.
Yeah.
So I think that's just, if you describe them that way and tell that to a concept artist, he's automatically going to come up with something like this.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't like that. I wish the Witchers would look different, but the way Geralt looks most of the time, I don't mind that much. It's nothing special, but it's good enough, I guess. What
Yeah,
do
they
you
actually
think?
gave him the leather headband that he has in
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
books.
That's great. Uh, I don't know how many people know that, but like part of the Witcher Stories production team, and the guy playing the main Witcher there, he loves to wear headband, the leather headband, and I like it too. I think it's very practical for people with long hair in combat. So yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
like either a ponytail or a headband. You need something. Yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise your hair is gonna flutter around like
Hmm.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the real military, the girls that I served, that they had to find some way of tying it up to get it under the helmet. Otherwise, if you jump around with your gun, it's constantly your hair in your face. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work. So yeah.
Yeah. Then there's like a look of Kaer Morhen, which they shot in some sort of stone quarry, and I guess they didn't have budget for a castle anymore. They are using some Polish castles in the show, but for some reason they couldn't use castle for Kaer Morhen, even though there have to be like hundreds of castles throughout the Poland. We have like
Yeah.
hundreds of castles here, so in my country. So I think I don't know why they did that. Maybe
I have
with
I have
budget.
some ideas on why they did each one of those, and I might comment on it once you're
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
because yeah,
Go ahead.
there's definitely justifications that I can see for some of these. For example, the special effects, I mean, that's easy, like the budget, like you don't have a huge budget to make a CGI dragon that looks anything decent. Like, I think at the same time, you had probably the movie with the dragon and mm, I forgot the name, but Draku was basically his name when he
I
has
mean,
the heart, the
yeah,
heart that he shared with the
Dragonheart.
one Dragonheart, exactly. Yeah, where he shared the heart. I think that was the first really good looking dragon in the
Yeah,
same time
that's the
frame, roughly.
like to
But
this
I mean,
day,
that
I think
was
that's the best dragon there is in movies. Like
probably, yeah.
I'm
And
not.
I think that was a huge production, so this show obviously couldn't compete with that.
I don't mean like in terms of the special effects, the quality, I guess, but I just like the look of it. Like, well, it doesn't matter, but yeah, it's one of the best
No,
dragons
I get
ever.
that, but I think we can agree that budget is obviously a big
Yeah,
issue.
yeah, yeah.
In terms of the samurai witchers, I mean, the helmets, I say, yeah, that's kind of stupid. But in terms of the curved sword, I think I have a pretty good idea on why they did that. and I think a lot of people that watch these shows now in 4K HD full size don't get so much because I'm a little bit of an older guy. I'm mid 40s, so back then, even in the early 2000s, you had a lot of really shitty TVs. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you sitting on your couch away from your screen that is really not that big compared to today's standards, you had basically back then TVs that were the size of a mid-sized TV computer monitor, and you were sitting like 5 meters away from it on your couch. Uh, they needed to have a way to identify the difference between the silver sword and the steel sword that is visible on such a small screen.
Mhm.
And Witcher 1 and 2 and 3 did that. Well, actually, I'm not sure about 1, but 2 and 3 did that by changing the hand guard. You have the V-shaped one for the silver sword, and you have the T-shaped one for the steel swords. That's how
Yeah.
the games did it. But
That's
that
in
detail
the
is
Witch one
probably
as well.
still exactly, yeah. It's still probably still too small a detail because that on Geralt's back, those are already pretty small, so you already need to tell the difference. But then on a TV screen, that's even smaller because you're further away from it. So I think the curved sword was just the easiest way for the prop department to figure out a way, okay, how do we actually make sure that a TV viewer can actually tell the difference between these two swords? I
Mhm.
think that was the main reason behind it, even though, yeah, culturally it's obviously complete nonsense, but not that Europeans don't have curved swords, but this was obviously a katana.
Mhm.
So eh, I think that was probably the main choice. They had a bunch of props that were all swords, and probably all the European swords just looked all too much like each other.
Mhm.
So it just some guy probably said, "Hey, listen, if we do it like this, the viewers are not going to be able to tell which one is which." That is one reason that I can see why they might have done that.
Mhm.
The stone quarry, yes, we have castles in Europe, but we need to distinguish between castle and fortress. If you want to go to a standard stone fortress, how many of those exist that are not complete ruins? I mean, Camorra is not supposed to be in good shape, but it's supposed to be semi-intact. How many do we have that actually have that state and then don't have a bunch of lights and guardrails and new additions that keep the tourists at bay in there, where you could actually shoot in a way that you don't constantly see that kind of stuff and keep all that within the production budget? That I can see as a little bit of an issue, because I don't know that many castles where you could make a shot, even if you want a nice photograph for your own album, where you can actually get a good shot of something where there isn't some kind of rail or lighting added or some guardrail that blocks stuff where the tourists are not supposed to go, or where they added some guardrail to the window so people don't climb in there. That is actually problematic to find something like that. Today, we would just shoot that and then in CGI post production just remove all of that stuff. But back then, they needed to find shots where that's possible. And even then, even Lord of the Rings had problems where they shot something and you can see a car in the background, and they only saw that on a second try. And when they played in the theaters, you can still see the car, and only for the DVD release they removed it. So that stuff is actually tricky. So I'm not sure how easy that would have been to find something. I'm
Yeah.
already impressed that they figured that out to do it with the Temple of Melitele, that they found a good place where you don't see too much stuff. But even in
Yeah.
Sintra, you see a
Um,
TV in the background and stuff like that. So
I'm not sure. I think it's doable even back then. Like what you mentioned, I get, and it is a problem. We actually deal with it with the Witcher Stories team a lot, but you usually can somehow do it if you are a
yeah.
competent filmmaker. And
I just don't know what their time constraints and money
yeah,
constraints were. If you first of all, you need to get for most of these castles, if you want to shoot something there, you need to get permission. That
mm,
might be time intensive. Then you need to be able to shoot it in a way that requires a lot of prepping to set up all the shots that would work in advance before you
mm,
actually get your actors in there. That might have been time or money prohibitive. I don't know exactly how much time and money they had available, but I know it definitely takes some additional time and manpower to make that work, because you need to scout the location, you need to get the permission to shoot there. Then you don't know how long you're able to shoot there, because obviously there's tourists there and they earn money with that. So if you the place for so many days, they need to make sure that they get money, because they don't have tourists that day and they don't have income on those days. And then they may need to vet you so they make sure you don't break anything. all those things can complicate things, and for some production studios, that might have been just too much of a hassle. So that's more a thing that the production company probably had to decide, or the TV network, and the actual filmmakers probably didn't have so much say in that. So that's a thing where I can see multiple reasons on why that might just not have worked out, and shooting in a quarry was just the most simple choice. Obviously not obvious. All of these things are problems that I agree with, but I can at least see some reasons from a production standpoint on why that might have happened.
Yeah, I would just expect like more production value from like a professional filmmaking company. That's all about this, I guess.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I can see. I definitely agree that they should have put more effort into it and make that work better. But if they only have gotten so much of a budget and so much time from the studio, you can definitely blame the studio for if we do this, we need to do it right. But once you have a set budget, looking purely at the filmmakers that have to work within those constraints, then I can see why they make certain decisions.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to mention regarding the next point. And you already mentioned it a bit with the special effects. They did the Golden Dragon, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know why they decided to adapt this short story when there are like they leave out so many other short stories. So they could have leave this out too, and it wouldn't matter much, I guess. But like it's
I think they
important
needed.
for stuff between Yennefer and Geralt, right? But
Exactly. That's what I wanted to say. They needed some short story to actually set up the relationship between Geralt and Yennefer. And you either have the Last Wish or you have the Golden Dragon, which you can use as a compensation, because in that they kind of talk initially about what happened previously between them. So you can use that to set up and not have to mention or shoot Last Wish, because they kind of mention the Last Wish a little bit, but or at least that they broke up earlier and whatever. So you don't need to see that first part of the relationship. The one with a shard of ice is actually the more important one, but you need something to set that up. And then you have to think about which one is the bigger hassle to do with special effects. The djinn that destroys half the town, or the golden dragon that basically just sits in the middle of a field. So they probably decided, oh, well, yeah, the djinn, that might be a problem. So maybe let's go for the golden dragon instead. And I have to say, obviously, Netflix did also a horrible job with the golden dragon. Not only is it a wyvern and not a dragon in their show, but even CD Projekt got that one wrong. In Thronebreaker, you will actually see there is also something that's supposed to be a dragon and only has 2 feet. I have to grant them one thing that I will say. A golden dragon is really hard to do without looking silly, because gold painted animal make that look cool and not completely like a spray painted animal. I will grant you that is actually a little bit of a challenge. Obviously, the dragon itself wasn't that great, but even the color itself is really hard to pull off without looking completely stupid.
You are talking about the Netflix version now?
I mean, the Netflix version looks better as a creature, but it still looks completely stupid, because it looks like, something that you painted gold with a spray can. It looks too gold. It's just doesn't look real. It looks painted.
Yeah, okay.
But the creature itself also doesn't look great in Netflix. But obviously the creature itself looks better than the Hexer one. But color wise, they both look stupid.
That's one thing I like. We just talked about it recently with the Witcher Stories production team, and we say this a lot, that if you have low budget, you need to work with like what you have essentially, not do stuff that costs money that you don't have. And like choosing better short story where you don't need to have as much of the special effects would be better. But I get that they probably needed it for relationship between Geralt and Yennefer, but I don't know. Like the relationship between them isn't that important in the show anyway, I guess. Like I don't know. Just I think
I also don't know what they had planned for a potential second season. I think she would have probably played a bigger role there. I think in the second half of the first season, they probably wanted to focus on Ciri and keep Yennefer a little bit in the first half. So I don't know exactly what they would have planned for the second season if they had gotten one. But I agree. Yeah, for the amount that Yennefer is in there, it might have been better to range her out or really use the last wish and basically cut out the entire stuff that they broke up and just use the last wish and then Shard of Ice. Because the fact that they broke up in the middle is actually not that important because they go on and off anyway, like having a breakup in there or not. They break up at the end of Shard of Ice anyway, so having another breakup in between, that doesn't really matter. So you could have just used Last Wish and then rewrite it to limit the Jinn stuff a little bit so you didn't have to show that as this huge big fight and just tone that down a little bit. I think that would have been easier than trying to pull the dragon off because you kind of can't tone that down. Once you have the dragon, you really need to show it. So I think toning down the Jinn would have probably been easier than the dragon. So in that sense, they probably probably should have picked the Last Wish because the golden dragon is also rather big and important. When the Jinn actually shows up in the Last Wish, mostly at the end, they could have done maybe one or two shots and be done with it and focus on the main part of the Last Wish, more on Geralt beating up all the city folks and talking with Yennefer and getting to know her and that sort of thing, and then keep the Jinn fight to a very, very big minimum.
Yeah.
With the Golden Dragon story, you can't really do that. There's not enough meat in the rest of the story to just ignore the Golden Dragon that much.
Yeah. Yeah. And regarding the special effects, I also wanted to mention they use practical effects, and like some of them are fine, but a lot of them are pretty bad. And usually, like it depends. If the CGI is done well, you don't notice it that it's bad, so that's fine. But usually people like prefer the practical effects because they look better when it's real. So yeah, I would say it looks better here definitely, but it's still not great. And
I think that's also one of the reasons why the movie version was so horrible, because I think most of the effects decisions got made with keeping in mind that it was going to show up on TV and most people wouldn't even see certain details. Once you put that on the big screen, it really shows how crappy it is. So you can't do special effects with a budget where you keep in mind that you're going to show it for TV and then put that on a big screen and show it in full size. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, so that's the special effects. The next thing I wanted to mention is I didn't like that elves looked like Native Americans. Again, it's similar to the Witchers looking like samurai. I know you've mentioned before we started the recording that you like them better than the elves in The Witcher 1. I don't know. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, because those look basically like Mongols, weird bald heads, and I never got that. That's actually the first thing I mod out.
Yeah.
But I will agree that they both look not the greatest. I can understand, however, why they made that choice, because the elves basically show up for the first time in the Edge of the World story. And in that, the way they talk about what happened to them, that the humans pushed them out of their previous territory and that they're more in tune with the wildlife and humans come in and take it all over. I mean, that's a pretty obvious hint at what the colonizers did to the Native Americans. So it kind of offers this image of what happened to the user. I mean, that's Sapkowski's writing. That's an obvious hint. I mean, that also happened to other people, but that's an obvious hint at colonized people. So that the art department then went and supported that image in the viewer by making them look like Indians. I can understand that, even to the point that TV studios usually think their viewers are idiots, so they need to support everything in three different ways so they get the point across, which is sometimes a little bit annoying. Like, guys, we get it. Like, one hint is enough. But that's what TV often does. They try to really put your nose on things. So since this was already an image of native people getting thrown out by the regular white guys. I can understand why they went for that imagery, because it just supports the thing. And that's something I noticed in general with the changes they made in the show. They try to pick up certain key themes and then really push those themes and change stuff around to support those themes. And this elves are Native Americans that get pushed out by the colonizers, by the humans. That is definitely one theme that they heavily went for, and the visuals are probably meant to just simply support that more. I'm not a big fan of it, but I at least can see the idea behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I also get it, but it's like the most obvious thing, like you see in the books. That's the first thing you like it reminds you of. And yeah, I don't think the visuals fit the world of The Witcher. That should be like, I know it's how to say it, it's combination and mix of different cultures and different even time periods, but it should be to some extent coherent. And the like time period is mainly medieval, so I would want to see more of something like in the Witcher games. It doesn't have to be exactly like that, but if you get the inspiration from actual armors that existed throughout history, you can make original designs that are your own. And since you've mentioned that you prefer this version to The Witcher 1, I
It's
would
less
say,
bad. They're both bad,
yeah,
but this one
yeah,
I feel is less bad.
yeah. I think I agree they are both bad, but there are some, like, if you the pictures you showed me are are horrible, but the way I think Toruvial looks in the games, I'm not sure. I have
The
here
female
the
elves actually look mostly fine. It's
yeah,
mostly the male elves in the game that look horrible.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a artwork from Gwent of Yevon, and he has an outfit from The Witcher 1, but it's obviously changed that it looks better and more practical, and I like that. So
Yeah, and Yavin actually looks fine in the game for the most part. It's the other elves, the more random elves. Unfortunately, they gave Shiriadan also that one model with the huge bald head. Like, I just don't like that. That just looks
yeah, yeah,
stupid. Why would the elves be bald?
yeah.
One
Okay.
thing would have been nice if they had done that in the show, but unfortunately, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings hadn't come out yet at the time. But if Lord of the Rings had already been out, it would have been awesome if they had gone for actors that looked like the Lord of the Rings elves, tall and beautiful, everything, and then put them into this role of being disheveled and pushed out. Because that would have showed this incredible contrast that you have the elves that are supposed to be this high culture and they still look that way, but they're in this horrible state of being pushed out of their frame and basically being refugees. That would have been a really cool contrast, that they still look like classic fantasy but are in a completely different situation, and that would have been an interesting visual contrast. But yeah, that visual design didn't exist yet, so you couldn't
Yeah,
play
yeah, yeah.
with that.
I think that what you said actually reminded me that, like, I think it's mentioned even in the books that the elves wear like beautiful clothing, but it's very, how to say it,
Worn down?
torn, yeah, worn down, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And what I don't like about elves in the Hexer show is that outfits look very, how to say it, like ordinary. And yeah,
They look like homeless people most of the
yeah,
time, yeah.
it
So,
isn't something great, anything fancy.
yeah.
So I don't like
They
that.
should look basically like they used to be a high culture, but
Yeah,
they haven't been in quite a while. But you still need to be able to see that a little bit. And especially Philavandriel, it just looks like an old dude
yeah,
with bad hygiene. Like, he doesn't look like he used to be an elf ruler. Like, when he says, I'm Philavandriel of the Five Towers or whatever, he says of the White Towers, like, he doesn't look like someone like that. Like, his face isn't noble enough, it's not soft enough. He just looks like a regular old dude. So
yeah,
he doesn't really look like an elf. Like Cheruviel, she's fine. The other guy, I'm not sure, Galar, I think that's Galar,
Yeah.
that she also shows up with later in the show. Those two are actually fine for the most part because they're supposed to be also the younger generation of elves, like that they're more this downtrodden guys that just angry all the time and don't dress like the high culture guys do. That's fine for the most part for me, but Philavandriel is the old generation that still saw the old times. He should look completely different. Yeah, Philavandriel is the bigger problem. Like Cheruviel, she's fine. She's the young, angry generation that maybe hasn't even lived long enough to still know the old times. They just hear the stories and get angry when they see how life is today. Kind of like today's generation is sometimes angry because they think everything today is crap and they really know the past, and they have just this idea of the past in their head, but they haven't actually lived through it. It's really different. That generation should look completely different from the older one, and the old guy is just, yeah, he looks like a regular old dude, and that bothered me the most. Yeah, the other elves don't bother me so much in Extra Show, but Philavandriel bothered me a lot.
Yeah. And since we are on the subject of the outfits, the costumes in general, I didn't like too much, but I have to mention I almost prefer this to the Netflix show because the, like, let's say, armors and some outfits look still more like it still feels more Polish and like Middle Ages in Central Europe than the Netflix show, which is just generic fantasy. Uh,
Yeah,
that's
and I
what.
know exactly why that is, because if you look at the props department and you don't want to spend so much money on designing custom stuff, but you look what do we have lying around? Well, in Poland, the production studio probably has a lot of stuff lying around from TV movies
Yeah,
about Polish history. And in the Americans, you have, yeah, if you want to do anything medieval, you just have stuff lying around from generic fantasy stuff.
yeah,
That's the big difference. In Poland, they had that stuff lying around for other TV productions that are supposed to play in the medieval times. So that gave them a little bit of an advantage in that regard. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. The problem is that the film productions usually don't have very historically accurate stuff anyway, so it wasn't great even in the Hexer, but it was still better. And yeah, I wanted to mention a very similar point uh, because the reason why I don't mind the bad costumes so much is it kind of reminds me of our live action fairy tales like we have in Czech Republic, I guess like other European nations have those too. I don't know if you have them in Germany, but yeah, we have these live action fairy tales and the
Oh yeah, we
costumes.
have some.
Yeah, those like costumes like this of like guards at castles and stuff like that, kings, and yeah, it's usually not great because it's just a fairy tale, right? And I bet, as you mentioned, that some of those costumes were from productions like that. So,
For sure, yeah.
uh,
And I
and
would also
because,
say that in the recent years, the awareness of or the quality standards of TV productions to pay a little bit more attention to historical accuracy has also shifted quite a bit. Back in the early 2000s, late 90s, and stuff like that, let alone in the 80s or earlier, that kind of stuff didn't really seem
yeah,
that
yeah,
important to TV studios. So if you look at old stuff, unless it's a period piece about now or recent history, anything that is ancient history or Romans or anything like that, Middle Ages, that is all completely wrong. So
yeah,
that was just not a big consideration back
yeah.
then. If it
That's
looked medieval, it was good enough, basically.
yeah, that's a problem even to this day. Like there are rare exceptions. Like there's a movie on Netflix, which is kind of funny. It's called Outlaw King, and it was I think like Netflix produced it, but it's English and like the armors there are pretty good, and I also like the Northmen. Like they are still not perfect through the eyes of like a medieval reenactor, although I don't know too much about that. Just doing LARPing and stuff like that. I have friends who know way more about it, but yeah, the movies are never really perfect, but there are some that do a good job, and but they are still rare. So to this day, historical accuracy is unfortunately something that the filmmakers just don't care about. But it's important, I think, and especially with The Witcher, the visual it's described in the books, how like medieval the world is, and but yeah, I wanted to mention because it like the costumes, as I said, look a lot like our fairy tales, and since The Witcher is based on fairy tales, it kind of fits the world.
It fits at least a little bit, yeah.
I wanted to talk about other cons, and probably I don't know, maybe there's more, but from what I wrote down here, changing the story from the books. That's something I always criticize Netflix for, so I think it's fair to mention it here as well. Um, I there are changes I don't mind too much because they at least make still a somewhat enjoyable story. And as I said in some of my videos, I don't mind the changes themselves. It's the changes that make it worse and
Or that are necessary, yeah.
yeah, then unnecessary stuff like that. And to be fair, even the changes here are for the worse, I would say. Like, I think the story in the books is just the best we got in all the versions, but I don't mind them as much as in the Netflix show, I guess.
If we go there and talk about the story changes, I'm gonna play devil's advocate yet again. Say why I understand some changes, definitely not all, but some changes, and I actually like some of the changes for a TV show.
Mhm.
And that puts it for me into contrast with Netflix because I can see what purpose some of these changes in the Hexer show serve. I can actually absolutely not understand what some of the changes in the Netflix show serve because they differ in wildly.
Hmm.
One of the things that I can see, for example, why certain changes in the Hexa show were made is to stick with certain themes. As I already mentioned, the theme, they're very important. For example, this theme of finding one's humanity for Geralt, they very deeply dive into that. That's not actually that big in the short stories. In the short stories, it's actually not a big deal at all for Geralt. I think that happens a little bit later that he questions himself being a witcher. I think that happens actually very late in the
Yeah.
novels. In the short stories, that's not so much of a thing, but I like that they dive into it a little bit more. That adds some scenes with Dandelion that are not actually in the books, but work very well in the show. For Geralt constantly question himself, do I deserve love? Do I deserve normal human life? And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Which they
and
kind of bring to a conclusion at the end of the season. So I understand changes switching around to make that sense. Also understand changes where they take side characters and give them additional stuff to do that originally was done either not by anyone or by different characters. Because yeah, I mean, if you have the cast like constantly switching around people, it makes more sense to have this cast and have them recurring people so you can have an actual season. I understand that as long as they don't do stuff that is completely out of character. For example, what they did with Renfrey, showing her both as actual Renfrey and as his first human encounter. That doesn't happen in the games, in the books, but it makes sense. It is not out of character for her, so it kind of works. Mm, what I do mind is when they change things around that don't work with the themes. What I don't like about the Netflix show is that they change things around and destroy the themes. They don't change things around to try and emphasize certain themes to have a kind of a constant plot for a season. No, they just throw out a story and replace it with something completely different. And
yeah,
even sometimes switch themes 180 degrees. For example, the famous You're Something More series and flipping that on its head. And instead of destiny is not enough, you need something more, they basically turn it into destiny is all you need. Which is exactly the opposite and completely ruins the entire story because the story is supposed to say the exact opposite. They don't do that in the Hexa show. They stick very much to the Witcher themes, which is also why certain things like relationship with Geralt and Dandelion, which we'll talk about later on the pros, actually work well because they stick to the themes and to who the main characters are. And I think most of the changes that they make are to try and emphasize that a little bit more and turn it into a consistent season when the short stories are obviously very disconnected and have very little to do with each other until later stories stitch them a little bit more together and give them context. So I can understand those changes to a certain degree. One might not necessarily agree with them or like them, but at least can see the purpose behind them. And on the other show, as I said, I don't see that at all.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And do you have some? You mentioned examples that you don't like. Certain.
Killing Nanika, for example, I don't see the purpose behind that. Renfrey is, I think that's actually supposed a kind of a damaging one, because Renfrey is actually supposed to be this kind of character where you're not exactly sure, is she bad or good, is she a monster or not. That's kind of the whole purpose behind her character. By her viciously burning down the Temple of Melita and killing all the priestesses, I think that puts her fairly squarely into the bad person category, and then you can't really feel so sorry about her anymore once Geralt kills her. So I think that's a major detriment. And also Nanika, I think, is a way too important character to kill off this early. I think that would have put them in a very difficult spot in the second season when Ciri is supposed to be trained at the temple for a certain amount of time, or third season or whenever that would have happened. I think that was one of the changes that I absolutely do not agree with. That I also can't see the purpose behind that one. They wanted to make Renfrey more menacing and more of a threat, and also show the Knights of the Flaming Road being really evil because they basically give her the contract to do that. But in my opinion, if you want to do something with the temple and at least attack it, like killing Nanik is out of the question, but even if you want the temple to be attacked, then let the knights do that themselves. Don't bring Renfrey into the mix, because Renfrey is menacing enough already. We don't need that to have that. You also have the scene where she impaled a bunch of elves and Geralt gives them the mercy kill. I think that's enough. You don't need the burnt down temple on top of that. I get that part of it is also that Ciri goes missing because they kind of mixed the burning down of Sintra with the burning down of the Melitalis temple. I think they mixed the massacre of Sintra with the Melitalis temple, but that doesn't work. You can't turn Melitalis priestess into Calanthe. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that change I don't agree with. That was one change where I can see what they tried to do. They couldn't afford the Sintra stuff, so they kind of mixed it in with Nenneke, but in my opinion, that just didn't work.
Yeah, okay. I know there are several of the changes I don't like, but I think we can, like, we want to do a podcast episodes about the whole show, so we will probably go through it there, I think.
Like, one thing I would say that I wanted to ask you is what do you think? Basically, there's two major things that got changed / added to the show to expand the characters a little bit. One of them is the addition, which that just doesn't exist in the books, the addition of Geralt's childhood. That's one major thing, and then turning Lord Falvik into this former Witcher and renegade. Obviously, Lord Falvik is just a Knight of the White Rose. He never had any role beyond that, except that he's a little bit of a cowardly dick, which, the guy in the Hexer show is also. But they gave him a completely different backstory. What did you think about those two parts, like the Geralt's childhood and training and Falvik thing?
I actually don't mind them, and I even like them to some extent, especially the childhood episode I like. And that's exactly what people said when they used to defend the Netflix show, that like they don't mind that Netflix showed Yennefer's childhood and sort of expanded her backstory, and showed even like scenes that we never that are not in the books, like her in Aretusa and stuff like that. So I think that would be fair even in this case. I don't know if people criticize that, but that's a change I don't mind and I actually like.
Yeah, the problem that I had with Yennefer's childhood was not that they showed it. I think they showed it at the wrong time.
Yeah, they showed it way too early. I said it in one of my videos, and you just ruined the, surprise reveal with it, or Netflix ruined it. Yeah.
Yeah, about Geralt's childhood, obviously two major things have changed. One, that he was a child surprise. That, I mean, actually in the books that is in there, and then Sapkowski retcons it himself. So in the end, he's not a child surprise.
Yeah.
But in one story, they actually claim that he is.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Like, he could be a child surprise, and he's not. Like, Sapkowski pretty much can't make his mind up about that himself. He retcons himself in some instances, so you can fully call that a change. The second one is that Geralt is in some way special and a kind of a renegade witcher because he's something new. You could say that you can't 100% dispute that, actually, because Geralt mentions some additional mutations that they did only to very few people, and he was the only one to survive that. So he is kind of the only witcher that certain things had been done to that no other witcher ever went through, at least not one that survived. What the impact of that was and why those sorcerers decided to do that to him. I mean, he said they basically did that because he survived everything else so great, so they just made another experiment. Was that the only reason? Would Geralt even be aware of that? You can argue whether there might be something going on behind the scenes that Geralt doesn't know about. I, however, don't agree that he would be, because of that, the only one that actually has real emotions and real humanity, because from the other stories, we obviously know that Vesemir and Eskel and Lambert are just as emotional or unemotional as he is. They maybe don't have Geralt's scruples in dealing with some monsters as much as he does, but they definitely also have human interactions, and they definitely also have certain emotions. They're a little bit more indifferent about certain things that Geralt bothers with a little bit more, but I wouldn't say that Geralt is that much more human than they are. So I think that was maybe pushed a little bit too far, but I will say that at least if you're going to make changes and if you're going to adapt something and you want to introduce an interesting new idea to give Geralt a little bit of a special status that gives him an interesting arc, because let's face it, Geralt basically doesn't have an arc in the short stories unless you get to Ciri. Before that, he basically doesn't have an arc.
Well,
So if you want to introduce one that doesn't just have to do with Ciri, but also with Geralt's personal development, it's an interesting one. I'll grant them that. Like in the books, basically, Geralt doesn't have an arc until he has to deal with Ciri, and
yeah.
then questioning himself whether he still wants to be a Witcher very late in the books. Until that happens, which is basically the very end of the second short story book, until that point, he basically doesn't really have an arc. So if you
Yeah.
want to invent one, so you actually have some arc for your main protagonist in the first season, it's an interesting one, and it doesn't go completely against Geralt's character, because in some ways, as I mentioned, scruples with monsters and dealing with certain things differently than other Witchers would have, that is something that makes Geralt special. And advancing that a little bit and fleshing that out a little bit and maybe showing an interesting idea on why that might be the case is certainly in the realm of possibility that you could do.
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that I don't like this change a lot. I just don't think it's very, very against the lore. Like him being still have, or I don't know. It's very vague in the books. Like, do
Yeah,
witches have
the
feelings?
idea with
I don't
the
know.
emotions, in my opinion, and I think that's what the show writers got very wrong, is that the idea is that witchers have no emotions. That was in the books. It's pretty obvious, in my opinion, that that's just what people say.
Yeah,
That's probably part of the pamphlet that got later pushed around, like the monstrum that talked shit
yeah,
about the witchers. In my opinion, that has never been true and is complete nonsense. And the stuff that Istrid is trying to tell Geralt is basically trying to gaslight him. That was never
yeah,
true. That is complete nonsense. So the fact that the show makes that actually true and Geralt is special, I didn't like that. That, because that puts the other Witchers in a certain spot that they're not supposed to be into. What I really didn't like, that it turns Geralt into an outcast of Kaer Morhen that is basically not liked by anybody. That is definitely not the case, as we can see that the few survivors at Kaer Morhen actually treat him like a brother and a very good
yeah.
friend. You could, of course, argue that everybody that hated him got killed in the uprising, and the only people that are left when he returns are the young guys he trained with and his fencing teacher, and that's the only guys that we see in the books. But I still think that's a little far-fetched. That Geralt is different might be okay, but that he's so different that he's an outcast, I wouldn't have gone that far. I actually would have liked it more. It also made his teachers look a little bit stupid in the show. I would have liked it better if they kept the part where Geralt is the first Witcher that introduces a new fighting style because he thinks like, dudes, like there's too many Witchers dying, we're doing something wrong, and he introduces this new idea of how to fight. Because Geralt is kind of one of the best fighters, so yeah, why not? Why not be one of the new generation of Witchers that do something different, and be a little bit of a maverick in that case, and Lambert and Eskel as the guys that trained with him kind of attached to that, and that's why they are the ones that survived. I could see that. That would actually be a fun idea, but driving it to that point that all the teachers start hating him and even want to kill him, I think that went a little far.
Yeah. Yeah, I would.
Because they literally try to kill him in the show, so.
Yeah, I agree probably. Although it's still interesting conflict, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it went just a little too extreme. That there was some discussion, and the teachers were a little bit mad that there's this young upstart that thinks he knows everything better.
Yeah.
I could see that, but I would have preferred if they had eventually come around to his way of thinking, and not this conflict going to this extreme that there's this we're trying to kill each other thing. I think that went too extreme.
Yeah, as you said, I think it makes them look very dumb. So yeah.
Yeah, it makes them look stupid. And sometimes it went also a little far that when he, like the teacher is beating the students up and hurting them and everything, and then Geralt going around and hiding so well from the guy on the horse that he falls and breaks his neck. That made the teachers look really incapable and stupid, and you wonder how did these guys ever survive? So it's a little. And the armor stuff, fighting in armor, like different fighting style is cool, but you can't tell me that anybody can fight a Striga in a samurai armor and heavy plate. Like that doesn't make any sense at all.
And what did you think about the women Witchers? Yeah, that's very like against the lore in The Witcher.
I mean, honestly, for what I mentioned earlier, that they put you on the nose with so much thing. I actually thought that the woman Witcher that he meets later is supposed to be the girl that he saves in the first episode. That's actually surprisingly vague and subtle, because that's actually not super obvious. I saw a lot of people watch the show and don't not actually get that. I don't remember whether I got it on the first watch, but
do you mean he meets female Witcher later in the show?
The female Witcher that he sleeps with in the second episode.
Yeah.
That's the same girl that
I
he
know.
rescues in the first episode. Yeah, a lot of people didn't get that, so they didn't make that super obvious, which TV shows obviously most of the time do. They explain everything 3 and 4 times, so everybody gets it. So I like that they kept that actually a little bit subtle in terms of that she's a Witcher at all.
Yeah, I don't know.
Again, I don't know whether female Witchers can be a thing. I only know the Wolf School didn't do that, and the Wolf School also doesn't know how to do that. I mean, the Wolf School doesn't even know how to do it with males anymore. But we know the Wolf School Witchers, which make up the most Witchers in the Northern Kingdoms, they didn't do that. Is there any school out there that does this with girls? We don't know. I will say I still don't like it because in this time period, it just doesn't make sense to pick women for this. First of all, they're supposed to get this medical treatment with hormones and all kinds of stuff to improve their muscle mass. Why start with the gender that already has less muscle mass and less bone density? That just doesn't make any sense. You have to compensate even more to get a super soldier out of that than you already have with guys. So that just doesn't make any sense. You're giving yourself a handicap from the start. Nothing against you girls out there, but I mean, I think you get what I mean. Also, women have already a more complicated hormonal system. Why subject them to this trial of grasses? I would assume that their success rate would be even lower than with guys, and even more would die. So because their body chemistry is just more complicated, so you have even more things that can go wrong. then you have the entire reproductive cycle. Like taking orphan boys and turning into Witcher, I think a society would probably have much less of a problem with that than taking the very limited resource girls that can be pregnant. I don't see those being things that people are okay with being given away and turned into witchers and made infertile. That's kind of like people that can get pregnant is kind of a limited resource in this time period. Yeah. So I think like people that can impregnate women, that like anybody can do that, but actually carrying a child, that's kind of special. Yeah. So I think that would actually be a horrible idea to turn those guys into witchers and have especially orphans after wartime when children die and girls and women die, and then you already have a problem having children. I don't see a lot of kings and also lords being okay with orphan girls being taken away and turned into witchers. So that just doesn't fit. I think nobody would have had that idea in this world because it's a horrible idea. I don't think there's anything in the world that says this isn't possible. I don't see why not. Like the wizards do all kinds of mutations and all kinds of things. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure they could turn girl into witchers. It'd probably be a completely different process, but it would probably work. I mean, Triss is even heavily implying that it's possible to do it with Ciri. She just heavily recommends against it. So I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be possible. I just think nobody would do it because it's a bad idea.
Yeah, and to be fair, like sorceresses are also is it mutation? I don't know. It's magic that makes them infertile.
It's more magic. Yeah, I don't think mutations, even though the mages heavily experiment with mutations, but I think there looks as pure magic.
Yeah.
There's not any mutations going on there. But as I said, like they would be able to do it. I just think nobody would because, again, this is a completely different time. Being able to get pregnant is actually a very important thing. You don't have a lot of people. The cities are not as big as today. The population density is not even remotely what it is today. Yeah. So you can have a collapse in population very, very quickly. And having girls around that can get a lot of kids, I mean, the family sizes would also be much bigger than today. Like having 7 to 14 children would not be rare. So making girls into witchers would just be a horrible idea. And I mean, we see even in some of the short stories and even in the Season of Storm books that some rulers and kings are even trying to prohibit any kind of birth control because they want kids, because they pay taxes and work on the fields and bring money. So not only if they're already against birth control, I can't imagine they're going to be a fan of turning girls into witchers. So, yeah, it's not a 100% against the lore. Is there a possibility that some Witcher school did that at some point? Yes, there's not at least no proof in the books that they didn't do that, but I just don't think it's very likely.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know just why they did it, because if the Geralt ends up to it isn't Witcher, it doesn't really change anything. Like they could
I think the main reason was because she was a Witcher, she didn't remember her childhood and she didn't remember their initial get together, and because he was not fully mutated, he still had his memory of his mother and also of this girl, so he still knows her, and I think they wanted that aspect. But I agree, they probably could have found a different way. I mean,
I think
she was an orphan, she was so young, it's questionable whether she would remember him as an adult anyway, even without mutations. So
like they could explain it with like that she was so traumatized by loss of her parents and what she witnessed, that she just doesn't remember that.
I mean, they didn't spend that much time together. They spent like a couple days as children, maybe a couple weeks, and that's it. Like, if you ask anybody as an adult whether they remember what they did at that age, like a lot of people don't. Another thing that I actually found interesting is that she is surprised that Geralt is sexually functional, but she apparently has a libido without that not being a big deal. Like, why isn't she also asexual? She's supposed to be a witcher. Why does she have a sexual drive? That is never explained either. I mean, technically, she shouldn't have a sex drive either then after the mutations, because apparently she's supposed to be a fully mutated witcher.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me also she doesn't come across quite as dumb and stupid and almost, I mean, the other guys, the other Witchers, what I also don't like is they don't just come across as unemotional, they come across as semi-lobotomized, that they're really retarded in
Yeah.
some sense almost. So she also doesn't come across as that. Like she still gets beaten by Geralt in a fight, but only because he uses different techniques. She never comes across as stupid or incompetent, which a lot of the other male Witchers do. So she's different than the other Witchers in many, many regards, not just being a woman. She's also completely different from the other Witchers. So yeah, that just was a little bit weird. That just didn't really fit. It's an interesting idea that female Witchers exist. I just think if they introduce something pretty big in terms of lore as that, I think it should have gone a little bit deeper than just providing a love interest for Geralt that doesn't even go anywhere, because I mean he basically sleeps with her and that's it.
Well, there's
The female Witchers never come up again, so I don't really see why they even did that.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to say that I don't like that there are female Witchers, but I like their relationship,
Oh
and
yeah, for sure.
it's also used as like like teachers in Kermorhen
Yeah, that they
order
try
her
to
to,
use her against him
yeah,
and stuff like
against
that.
him,
Yeah.
and they order her to break up with him so he would be hurt and confused for the fight for the final test. So I like that
And
kind
I
of.
like that she refuses. I like that she builds enough of a connection to him that she refuses, which again, if she doesn't have emotions, how does that work? But yeah, I like that part. I'm just saying, to me, it's not justification enough to introduce female Witchers just to have that
Yeah,
love
definitely.
story. I need a little bit more to justify introducing that, because you could have that love story in a different way.
Yeah.
She could still show up as whoever. She could show up as, I don't know, like people that trade with the Witchers and bring them
Or
food or
some
whatever.
like refugees or something like that.
Refugees, yeah, and she is part of a group that has relations with Cameron, because they mention they trade with temples and they trade with certain people for food. So she could just have been, I don't know, a priestess of Melitele and maybe mix her in with Nenneker or something like that with the Nenneker storyline. I think that would have actually worked better. Maybe switch her with Yola or whatever.
Yeah.
That could have worked. Make her Yola. Maybe he met Yola as a child. Who knows? I think that would also have worked better.
Yeah.
Introducing her as a female Witcher just to have a love story, I think that was a little, yeah. I don't see that as a justification. You could have had that same love story without her being a Witcher, especially since she doesn't even act like a Witcher. She has a sex drive. She doesn't act like the other Witchers at all. She definitely has emotions for Geralt, which the Witchers are not supposed to have in the Hexer show. So it doesn't even work. Like she doesn't even act like a Witcher. So to me, it would have worked much better if she was a priestess of Melitele. Then you could still have that hesitation to have sex with Geralt because maybe the priestesses are not supposed to do that or whatever. Uh, I don't know. You could have found some way to have this initial resistance to start anything with Geralt without her being a Witcher. I think that didn't add anything aside from them having a fight, but I mean that wasn't really necessary either. So yeah.
Okay.
That's one change where I don't see the justification. Like I mentioned,
Yeah.
I see some changes that I don't see what the purpose behind that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's more, but as I said, we can go through it in the podcast.
Yeah, I think we covered all the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So we discussed most of the cons we have here. I'm sure I forgot some. I actually wanted to mention, if you are listening to this and you don't like the Hexer show, let us know in the comments what you don't like, specific points, because we will go through the episodes in the podcast one by one, so we can then address these points. Yeah. So let's go through the things we liked. I have to say, and this is something many people mentioned as the biggest pro of the Hexer show, is Michal Žebrovský as Geralt. It's really hard to cast the character. And what I'm trying to say is, I don't like him. His look didn't picture Geralt like this, but he's so charismatic, and he just portrays the conflicted character that's described in the books that Geralt has so well that he grew on me over time, and I just really like him as the character. So, what do you think?
Well, if you ask any Polish person, they will tell you that they hate the show, but they will also say Zabrowski is Geralt.
Mhm.
He's Geralt to them. That's just not even a question. I talked to a bunch of Polish people when I was in Poland, and basically all of them hated the show, but they also always said, "Yeah, that guy, that's Geralt." That's almost no question for them. So I think he's very liked in the role, even though the show is something that is heavily criticized. I think his performance is never put into any question.
Mhm.
Whether his looks are fitting, I mean, yeah, like the looks, some people like Cavill, some people like him, some people like Geralt from the games, some people like Geralt from the first game more than the third game, sometimes the other way around. Doesn't really matter. Actually, the books don't go that much into detail what he looks like, actually. Sometimes he's described as looking fine, sometimes he's described as looking ugly, but then that's always statements that are said by some person. So a lot of the statements in the books are always from a certain point of view, so you can actually never really say what is the actual fact. So aside from him probably not being a hunk, but a little bit more a lean, fit type, aside from that, and him having white hair and a voice that sounds ugly to some, and that he can have a really ugly smile. Beyond that, we actually don't really know what he looks like. So there's a lot of open for interpretation here. In terms of having an actor that really portrays Geralt's character well, his interaction with other people well, and that actually pulls off the change over the course of the show from this naive young trainee witcher to his first encounter with humans to the very disillusioned seasoned witcher at the end that is kind of has enough of humanity because they're all assholes anyway, kind of. I think he pulls that off very well. Add to that the makeup department that really makes him grow older and more stressed out over the course of the series, and you have a really great performance.
Yeah.
That is one of the aspects that makes me always enjoy the show. Zamachowski, I think that's the one that plays Jaskier,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And Borowski, those two are basically that show for me. And those two performances and their interactions is basically the main reason why I enjoy the show. I go more for the characters and less for the plot, and those two just make it incredibly enjoyable to watch. And I must say also the young actress that plays Siri, I must give that a little go. Also, quite the kudos. I have actually no idea what that actress is doing nowadays, but whether she still is an actress or not, I kind of have to look that up. But
Oh.
she's also doing an amazing job. She's one of the few child actors that are not annoying and actually pull off the role. And her interaction with Geralt are also cute and appropriate.
Yeah.
And you can really feel a little bit of a connection there. So that just all works for me. And that is also a lot of things that other shows and interpretations often get wrong. The character interactions, even the games, actually don't 100% get the Geralt Dandelion thing right.
Definitely.
The second game probably comes closest. The first game is, it works kind of in the fourth act. It doesn't really work in Vizima. And the third game, kind of does Dandelion a little bit of a disservice. So I think in terms of adaptations, for that friendship, the Hexer show actually does it the best.
Yeah, since you mentioned The Witcher 3, and very much agree that it does Dandelion disservice, and I'm not sure, but it's a possibility that that's what caused the way how he's portrayed in the Netflix show. I'm not sure. Like The Witcher 3 is the most popular portrayal of The Witcher, so before like the Netflix show got popular. So I'm not sure, but it seems to me that like they even in The Witcher 3 they portray him as an idiot, and even though Dandelion often acts like that, it's it's definitely not his whole character. But I
Yeah.
explained that in my videos already, so we probably
Dandelion is actually very
pretty smart.
smart and
Yeah,
actually very brave. I mean, you just have to read the story and the edge of the world. I mean, he passes out from free in the end, but he still decides to stick with Geralt and he doesn't beg for his life or anything. He's
yeah,
actually very defiant and he puts out that famous Polish line, your mother only gives birth to you once and only once do you die, which is kind of this line about defiance in the face of danger. That doesn't really come across very much in the translation because in the West we don't have that expression, but
mhm,
he uses it, even though he uses it with shattering teeth. It still shows like he's obviously not a fighter. He's obviously not a person that is used to being in these kind of situations. He's used of hanging around at courts and singing to kings and at people that where girls are cheering him on and whatever. He's not used to these kind of situations. So for someone like that to be that defiant in this position actually says a lot about his character, also about his loyalty to Geralt.
yeah,
So he certainly has those aspects, and he's also rather smart. He's sometimes not as smart as he thinks he is, but he's not stupid either. So he studied at the University of Oxford. He even taught there as a guest lecturer. Those are not big tales that he keeps telling. That's actually true. And he's obviously his real name is Julian Alfred Pankratz Viscount de Lettenhove. So he actually has a little bit of a noble birth background as well. So he's not just a bumbling idiot that runs around getting into trouble.
yeah,
That is part of who he is, but that's just because he's a guy that enjoys life and doesn't worry too much about everything. So a person like that is going to get into trouble every now and then, but he
mm,
usually is not getting into major trouble. He might get into trouble with a husband when he slept with his wife or whatever, but he usually can get himself out of that. The thing getting Geralt into trouble that doesn't actually happen that often in the books. I mean, that happened in the story with where they fight over the lamp with the genie in it. But in that story, he gets mostly himself into trouble because he gets badly injured.
yeah,
So he sometimes even helps Geralt out of trouble. So
yeah.
it's
I actually one. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I wanted to mention, since you mentioned that he's brave. Even I'm not sure what book it is. Is it? Yeah, Time of Contempt, I guess, where he has to contact Geralt when he's in Brokilon, and
oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Brokilon is known for like you can't just enter it; you will get shot by dryads. So
For sure, yeah, and
um,
he sings a song and he hopes that gets him entryway. So
yeah,
it's actually yeah, it's pretty obvious that you're not supposed to go near Brokilon because as we see in the book, they don't just shoot you once you enter the forest. They shoot you actually quite a long
yeah,
distance before you enter the forest. And we see even children lying in the fields just because they ran towards Brokilon by accident and they still got shot.
hmm,
So they're pretty ruthless about not wanting any humans near them. So for him to even dare do that just because of his friendship to Geralt, yes, he's a very loyal friend and he sometimes risks his life to help his friends. I think that also comes across in the Hexer show because when he goes into the cave with, I don't know, some kind of creature in there, I don't remember what it actually was,
hmm,
but he goes in there to get the money, not for himself, but to help his friends and to buy Geralt's swords back. That is amazing. I mean, literally risks his life and goes into a cave where he knows there's a monster inside, and just to be able to get Geralt's swords back. That's great. I mean, that never happened in the books, but it's definitely something he would do because he
yeah,
does similar things in the books.
mhm, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, and
I,
I'm not saying Dandelion in Witcher 3 was out of character. I think they just showed one side of
yeah,
him and
one
completely
aspect
neglected
of
the
him.
other ones. Made him a disservice. Whether that influenced the Netflix adaptation, I have no idea, but I think we agree that that adaptation is
Yeah,
bad, even though the
hmm,
actor does a good job. The writing is
yeah,
horrendous.
yeah. He's
Um,
probably one of my most favorite, even probably like the best,
the actors are
best.
fine. Even the actress for Yennefer grew on me over time. It's just that the writing is horrendous. It's
Yeah,
garbage.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's actually similar to the Star Wars movies. We're feeling actually sorry for these actors because it's obvious that they're somewhat excited about this property, and then they get garbage writing, and
yeah,
it
yeah.
all falls apart.
Actually, I wanted to go back to Zebrovsky a bit because we sort of got into the relationship of Geralt and Dandelion a bit sooner than I wanted. But I wanted to mention just you already said that he goes through this arc where he is at first very naive and then disheveled and like very, how to say it, I don't
Disillusioned.
know. Yeah, this is I guess. Um, I even like how he portrays, and that's straight from the books, how he wants to be friends with humans, but like he's not supposed to because like first of all, you are not supposed to meddle in the like stuff between people, so you can't make friends, and also yeah, you just don't want to meddle in the political stuff and stuff like that, even though he does that the first thing he when he leaves the Kermorhen. So yeah, I really like that how he portrays this in the show, Zebrovsky, because yeah, I can often like I don't know, he just portrays the sadness really well,
The
how,
loneliness, yeah.
yeah, loneliness, and I don't know, I
And that is
think
also something, by the way, if we go into prose, because we criticized the writing so much earlier for a lot of changes, there
hmm,
are some really good changes. Like there are some scenes between Zabrowski and Jaskier where they have conversations that really express what we just said, the loneliness and the
yeah,
despair of Geralt. And we can see why these two are friends because Jaskier always picks him up and gives him a different point of view. And he says,
yeah,
yes, humans are awful, but there are also really great humans and they're really special. And that makes it worth to get to know them.
hmm,
That is something absolutely, yes, that's not in the books at all, but that is absolutely a discussion that Jaskier would have with Geralt because there's something very similar in the story A Little Sacrifice where
mhm,
Geralt tells him, "Oh, there's a lot of crap and whatever, and I'm pissed and I don't want to talk to you." And then Jaskier says, "You know what? You're just angry because you thought she was just interested in you because you were a witcher and a freak,
yeah,
and when it turned out that she was actually interested in you, you acted like a little child and treated her like crap. That's on you. Don't act like the world is against you. That was your fault." And don't treat us as if there are actually people out there, Geralt, that actually like you for you. Not everybody just sees you as a witcher. There are actually good people out there.
hmm,
And that is something that Jaskier tells Geralt. That is literally in the books. So this conversation that happens in the Hexer show is very similar to that. So
yeah,
that is totally in the character for those two. And I love those scenes.
yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
both actors pull that off fantastically.
Yeah, and we obviously the next point like we already got pretty much into it. The next point is that we both like the chemistry between Geralt and Dandelion, but yeah, I wanted to actually ask you because that's one like con that I perhaps forget, even though I don't mind it too much. So that's why I probably didn't include it. But it's something that people often mention that Dandelion looks like an old uncle and like yeah, just this old guy who like the way Dandelion is or Jaskier is described in the books is very different. So I know
I mean, the
you
age the
yeah.
age is probably not so much of a problem, but he's a little bit too short and stocky, probably for most people.
Hmm.
But we'll go into that in a second. The one thing I wanted to say, the reason why the chemistry works so well is also because of what you just said. Zebrovsky just pulls off the vulnerability of
Mhm.
Geralt off really well, and that gives an opening for Jaskier to come in and be a good friend. If Geralt was this untouchable stoic guy as he is in the Netflix show, you wonder why does this guy even need a friend? Like there's nothing about him
Yeah,
where he displays a need of having a connection with anybody. He's always the stoic guy that nothing can touch. That doesn't work. In the Hexer show, they clearly show, and by the way, that's not who Geralt is in the books either.
yeah,
He definitely have vulnerabilities and questions himself. He
yeah.
even gets suicidal at times. So these that is a big part of that Zabrowski pulls off why his chemistry with the other actor works so well, because he has this vulnerability and you can see that he's suffering internally.
Yeah.
Why he needs a friend, because he never had one, and you can see that he never had one, and that is pulling it off so great. And to me, in terms of the looks, yes, he looks nothing like Dana is supposed to. Neither does the book character. It does the game character, by the way.
Yeah.
He's actually supposed to be blonde. That's why he's always named as a name like a flower with yellow flowers, because he is supposed to have yellow hair. I mean, Sapkowski never spelled that out until the last book that came out after the games, or shortly before Witcher 3. But I mean, it was heavily implied, so technically that doesn't work anyway. But yeah, technically he does look nothing like Jaskier. However, on the one hand, I also criticize a lot of the casting in the Netflix show. To me, at the end of the day, if you change the casting, do it for the reason that these characters have incredibly good chemistry with each other, these actors. I don't see that in a Netflix show, even though I really like the individual actors and really like what they do. I don't think they have good chemistry, at least not the chemistry that the characters are supposed to have. I don't see any chemistry between the Yennefer actress and Cavill. And I don't see much chemistry going on between him and the Dandelion actor either. The individual performances are great. The chemistry doesn't exist at all. That is not at all the case in the Hexer show. These chemistries, even between Zabrowski and the person that plays Yennefer, his chemistry between the actress that plays Renfrey was actually amazing. That worked also fantastically well, even though she's also supposed to be blonde. To me, I don't care about hair color so much, maybe with an exception for Triss, because her hair color is a little bit more important, and there's so few gingers on TV anyway. But technically, I don't care. Like, for example, making what's her face, Fringilla, was it Fringilla that they turned black? That doesn't work at all, because first of all, she's supposed to be the cousin of the Emperor, and second of all, she's supposed to look like Yennefer, so that just doesn't make any sense at all. Aside from such obvious nonsense, I don't care if you change your hair color or everybody has the right eye color or whatever. I don't care. What I do care about is that if you choose someone that looks nothing like the character, pick someone because they have fantastic chemistry. Here, that is the case. This guy is Jaskier, no question about it. He doesn't look like Jaskier, but he acts like Jaskier. And that is much more important to me. And he has the friendship with Geralt that he's supposed to have. That is way more important to me. In addition to that, I will also say that if I imagine a guy in medieval times that's a bard, that obviously enjoys life, that goes from tavern to tavern, from brothel to brothel, has a beer here and there, has fun, enjoys life, is a real guy that just lives life, this is the guy I picture.
Yeah.
I don't picture this long, lanky bard. This is skinny, and no, I picture this guy. This guy looks like a guy you have a beer with and go from tavern to tavern and from brothel to brothel, and knows every corner of Novigrad. That's the guy. So to me, this guy actually looks way more realistic to the character than the description in the books. So from that perspective, this character actually totally works for me. Because if I see him over a half drunken in a tavern and then suggesting, "Hey, let's go for the brothel next," that he suggests to do to the books, yeah, this guy looks much more like a person that I can see in that role than the Dandelion from the games. But that's beside the point. But for me personally, that just works. He just looks like that kind of guy. But again, the main reason for me why I don't mind the casting is the absolute fantastic chemistry these two have. So even if Geralt doesn't have the right body type and this guy's way too short and too stocky for a Dandelion, to me, these two are perfect for the role. And I always picture them like this when I don't play the games, because they're just perfect. They portray these two characters exactly right. So whatever you say about this show and its story changes and everything in there, I think nobody can argue that these two aren't the perfect pair in these two roles. They just work. There's no question about it. And I've rarely met anybody that actually had a criticism about their chemistry.
Yeah.
I think that's almost the one positive thing that everybody gets out of this show. These two actors. But as I said, there's also some other chemistry that works really great. Like Geralt and Renfrey in the Hexer show is amazing. Renfrey herself is fantastic in the show. She's exactly right. She definitely has this sometimes vicious smile that is at the same time super innocent and attractive, where you really can't tell, is this broken innocent girl, or is this the vicious killer? Aside from the stupid scenes with her burning down the Temple of Melitele, the actual story, the Lesser Evil, is really well done. Like, they don't get the reasoning why Geralt attacks the guys in the market right, but his interaction with Renfrey and Geralt's conflict about her, that is absolutely great. That is really well done.
Yeah.
Even his frustration of meeting Dandelion outside the town and telling him, like, none of them know what actually happened. I saved their lives and they don't even know it, and they're so stupid, and I hate humans. I can totally see that. Yeah, we don't see the actual aftermath of that story ever. We don't know how Geralt felt in the immediate aftermath. We just see a scene between him and Stregobor, but aside from that, there's enough in there that we can tell that he feels like absolute shit. But beyond that, we don't really get any kind of interaction with anybody afterwards. So having that in the show just added to the friendship with Dandelion, because that's the one scene, for those of you who haven't watched the show, that's the one scene where Dandelion goes and tries to pick Geralt up, where he tells him, yes, humans are awful and it's all just fighting and violence, and you really have a hard life, and due to your life you only see the negative stuff. You only ever see the conflicts and the fighting and the violence, but there's other stuff out there. There's good stuff, there's love, and there's friendship, and when you find people that you really connect with, it's really special. It's like a diamond, and those are worth looking for. And I think that's wonderful. That's also appropriately poetic for a bard to have this kind of metaphor and this kind of outlook and trying to explain life in those terms. I think that works perfect. That works amazingly well. So sometimes the writing is actually amazingly good. It's really a lot of ups and downs with the show. It can have scenes that are absolutely fantastic, and then it has the golden dragon.
Like, regarding Dandelion, I wanted to mention, like, some in terms of his looks. I think some people could criticize that, like, how could this fat guy could be a womanizer who's described in the books, but I think that people probably know guys like this, these sort of chubby and funny guys who
people like that have no clue how women work. If this guy is confident and fun, and he's a bard, so he's something special, like this traveling bard, oh my god, like, women would be all over this guy. Like, how many rock stars are out there that are not attractive at all, and they have groupies all over? Like, this guy would have women lined up because he's special, he's confident, he's funny, he knows how to have a good time. He's charming. He knows how to flirt. This guy would have no problems with women at all. Like, and he's not unattractive. Sure, he's not the stereotypical beautiful guy, but that's not how women work. Like, this guy would have lots of female fans, no question about it. Specifically because, he's not super traditionally attractive, but he doesn't care. He's confident, he's funny, he's charming, he knows how to have fun. No problem. He would also be the guy that women are pissed at because he sleeps around with other women, which he's also supposed to be like. So, like, the womanizer doesn't mean only a Don Juan type. These kinds of womanizers also exist plentiful out there, and women don't just go for looks. They mainly go for a guy that can make them laugh, that is charming, that has confidence, and that is somehow mysterious and interesting, and a traveling bard that also can cite poetry. Like, dude, totally, absolutely, this guy would be a womanizer, no question about it.
So I think we covered that pretty thoroughly. So the next thing I wanted to mention is the Polish nature. That's something I really appreciate.
I would actually go further. I would say it's not just the Polish nature, it's the Polish atmosphere in general. It's the background people. that just look Polish. It's the buildings. It's the general
Yeah,
atmosphere. I think this show and Hex and Witcher 1 are the both that get the feel and atmosphere the most right.
yeah, yeah. I actually mentioned it in my last video, but yeah, definitely. Like the architecture and nature play a big part, and they are sort of they need to work together, right? Like if you want to
Yeah,
portray,
and as I said, it's also important to have the right people in the background, like the people that you just hire for one day to just walk around in the background and not have
yeah,
a line, that are not even
extras.
actors.
Yeah.
They look like Polish people. They look like people from this area. They don't look like people from North America, or
Mm.
from all over the place. They look like, I mean, they also could be Czech or East German or whatever, but they look like they come from that place, and they look like not all super attractive Hollywood stars. They look like regular people that look Central European and Slavic, and they just fit in the place. They fit to the buildings. They fit to the landscape. You can tell that all of those things belong together. It
Yeah.
just looks right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not like too bothered about extras looking like that, but yeah, definitely it's plus, it's a
But
bonus.
at
But
least side roles. For example, Dun and
yeah,
the Elder from the Edge of the World. Those
yeah, yeah,
just look exactly like they're supposed
yeah,
to.
yeah, definitely. Even there's a new movie which I really liked. It's called Chlopy, if I pronounce that right in Polish, and the peasants in English. It's adaptation of this Polish novel, I guess, and guy who's the mayor of the village in the Edge of the World. I know there are two villages, lower and
Dun?
lower Posada and yeah, the other one,
Is it
but
just Dun, or is that the other
Dun,
guy?
I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, 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 Dun, I guess. But yeah, he looks like almost exactly like the guy from this movie, which is also which is adaptation of like a Polish countryside. So yeah, you have definitely a point about that they look Polish, and yeah, that's great. uh I
Yeah, and
yeah.
as much as most North Americans are obviously European settlers, I don't know what happened. Was it the food or whatever? But nowadays, most North Americans look nothing like Central Europeans. You can immediately tell that most, like, obviously not everybody, but there's some kind of difference there where you can tell, okay, yeah, this guy's an American. They
Mm.
definitely don't look like Polish people.
Yeah,
So,
I
I
don't
mean, some guy that
think.
runs around the background might not be so important, but some side characters that at least are a little bit featured, you can just tell that, okay, this guy doesn't really look like he belongs here. And that is an issue a lot in certain adaptations, that the people just don't look right.
Mm, yeah.
Like certain character actors that are not supposed, like the main actors are usually looking some kind of star. They're usually more attractive than the regular person. But for these side characters, it's always great when you have some kind of actor that has this typical character actor face that is a super interesting, super unique face. And for those, when they fit the area where they're supposed to come from, that can really add to a movie or a show so much. And there's, especially when these guys are also good character actors and can really pull off the role well, that just works in
Mm,
this show. That just works
yeah.
very well.
Yeah, since you mentioned the architecture, I would point out there are many castles to use in the show, like these village museums, which are great. And as I said before, I think they need to work together. So if you want to have like a sort of ordinary village, it wouldn't be surrounded by like some sort of epic landscape of like with mountains and mountain range and stuff like that. And that's what I
For
don't
sure,
like
yeah.
about many fantasy worlds, where they go for the epic look, where every like background sort of vista, or however you call it, is epic. This like epic
Yeah.
mountain range, which a lot like fantasy adaptations got from Lord of the Rings, I guess, where they used New Zealand. and so then every fantasy movie and show had to look like that. But
Yeah, I don't understand that either. And especially since even in North America, you wouldn't actually have to go that far to find something that looks a little bit similar at least. Just go to somewhere in the Midwest with a bunch of cornfields and some European looking landscapes and small villages. Like obviously the buildings are not going to fit, but you can build something. But the landscape's going to be fine. And most of all, you're going to meet people that actually still have this attitude of people that just like living in the countryside, that just like this life. Like it sometimes seems like people in the big cities in LA and places like that think country life needs to look like some kind of high fantasy Garden of Eden or whatever. No, it's just couple of trees and a forest here and there and a bunch of fields and just a nice little village. Like you guys have that in the United States too. Just maybe walk 5 miles outside of LA once in a while. It's like there's people in the United States that are just like that, that still have this attitude and even still have a whole lot of these traditions from their European origins. It's just, yeah, if you live only in the big cities and the metropolises, then you have no idea what that means. And then you think everything needs to be this super epic thing. No, not at all. Just you walk through the behind out a little bit outside the village between the farms and a couple of forests and with the hedgerows between the fields and everything. It's wonderful. And that's the life that these people live. Like you don't need this high epic thing. And that's, as you mentioned also, I think that's what Witcher 2, for example, got wrong with Flotsam. That's way too fantastical. It's just these small villages with these normal people that just enjoy their life and enjoy having their little house and being able to walk with the dog and not worry about 50,000 cars, and the dog can run in the fields and have some fun. That's the life that we're talking about, and that's what you need to represent. And you could represent that there are landscapes like that in the United States, or even England with a lot of the fields and the hedgerows, or Normandy. Like you don't even have to be in Poland. Like these kind of landscapes exist all over the place. It's just you have to go to them. Don't make everything CGI super landscapes. It's just why? No.
And I think which Netflix show was mostly shot in Britain because it was done in some British studios, but they often used like northern England, which is very mountainous. So
yeah, they should have just used England. Like for example, there is this one YouTube channel from this Modern History TV, I think he calls himself, like the one guy that has the game studio and now does all this thing about medieval times. Like or even other people that talk about swords and medieval stuff. The stuff that they shoot in their backyard with their own cameras for their YouTube channel. That's exactly the kind of landscape you need to show. There's a guy that plays as a hobby a knight and has a game studio and just rides around on his horse in the middle of England, just like 5 kilometers away from his home. That looks like medieval times. That looks like something you could put in a Witcher show. Like, why is that so difficult? This stuff is right around the corner, guys. You don't have to go that far. It's just normal landscapes. Everything outside the big cities. It's not hard to find. You don't need huge CGI budgets for that kind of stuff. I don't get it.
I think what's important is to point out that I don't know if that's something that's just me seeing that in the Witcher books, but to me, The Witcher is very mundane, if that's the right word. It's not this
that's not
epic.
Definitely not just you. That's the whole point. It's about these normal people's lives. That's also why Witchers are mostly not getting involved with big major events. Like, sure, there is a major event going on later in the novels with the Nilfgaardian War, but the whole point is Geralt never even gets involved in that. That happens on a sideshow. Geralt is not even in that. And the first war he didn't even know about. He missed that completely. That's the whole point. And even when you go in with the wars, you see individual young soldiers, like poor fucking infantry kind of stuff. You don't just look into these elite soldiers or whatever. You look into the normal, almost a 1917 movie kind of thing where you follow a single soldier in this massive battle that is way too big for him to understand. You follow the mundane people in mundane problems, and most of the problems Geralt is involved with have nothing with big political events. He's not even interested in that. In fact, he wants to stay as far away from that as he possibly can.
Yeah.
And the only reason he ever gets involved in any of that is to help his friends, or if some ruler gets him involved in that against his will. Most of the stories about normal people, normal peasants. And I think they mentioned that in the book Blood of Elves, where they mention, oh, there's going to be a war breaking out, and the other Witchers are even a little bit too unemotional about that, and they say, oh, great, when a war breaks out, there's going to be a lot of orphans and young and people in despair that going to need our services, so it's going to be a good year. I mean, yeah, it's probably a little bit cynical to look at it that way, but that's the life they live in. They don't care about big wars and these leaders. All they know is, yeah, if there's crap happening in the world, there's a lot of people gonna be in deep crap, and that's the world we live in. We live in with the normal people that don't lead wars or start battles. No, they're the ones suffering from it. They're the ones with the fields that the armies trample all over, and they're the ones that get stuck with the corpse eaters that are following in the footsteps of these battles and that are gonna eat their children. That's the life the Witchers live in, not this big epic stuff, but the stuff that normal people have to deal with. Because those are the people hiring the Witchers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm saying this a lot in my videos, that Geralt travels often through countryside and spends most of his time there. But
I mean, who else is going to hire him? Like, a noble can afford an army. What does he need a Witcher for?
Yeah, well, they need Witchers too sometimes, but
yeah, I mean, for some curses, I mean, like for Foltest, yeah, but obviously, big king won't hire a Witcher to kill a drowner. So,
I guess. Although, well, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But for me, that what makes The Witcher unique and different from most fantasy worlds in the genre is that it's so down to earth and mundane. It's not this epic high fantasy, like fighting for the whole world, like in the Lord of the Rings, for example. Like this last
I mean,
battle.
he's no Aragorn.
Yeah,
and he even says that in the Blood of Elves. He literally says, like, I'm no hero. I'm not even a soldier. I'm way too scared to join some war to enlist in some army. Like, I'm way too afraid of dying for that. It's like, he's not like that. It's his job. He does it for money. He does it so he can afford a meal every day. It's not because he wants to save the world or be the superhero. It's not like that. Sure, on his first meeting with humans, he at least hoped that they would be thankful and maybe kiss his hand or whatever. But he's not out there to save the world or be a superhero. It's not at all who these people are. He's just doing a job, and if people can't pay him, he won't help them. If he literally says it, if I don't care if Nilfgaardian people pay me to save their children, I'm gonna work for them. To me, that doesn't make any difference. And he doesn't get involved with this stuff. I mean, sometimes that changes. Like, one of the Witchers fought in the war with Nilfgaard and died in it. But that's not what they usually do. It's usually stay out of it and worry about the little people. And yes, sometimes, of course, they get hired by kings. Geralt mentions that several times. But they usually for something big, for, oh, we have a dragon here or whatever, forktail that kills our armies or whatever. They're not going to pay them to kill 3 drowners just because they kill a bunch of peasants at night. Like, they don't care about those people's worries. They don't care about every little problem. Yeah, but the people who pay Geralt do. They are the ones that suffer. They are the ones that don't have any means to deal with those dangers, and they're the ones that have to turn to the Witchers and hope to get some help for them, and they barely have any money, so they are also the ones that afterwards try to betray the Witcher for their money because they barely have any to begin with. It's kind of like you need something fixed in your house and you can't afford the handyman. It's a very mundane job. It's almost like they do in the Ghostbusters, where you have these guys that do this elaborate job, but they're basically treated like people that go hunting cockroaches. It's that is the charm of this. That was also the charm of the Ghostbusters movies, that these guys were just these schlubby guys with a small company that basically get called when you take out the trash. It's exactly with The Witcher. It's mundane. He's not a hero. He's this guy that you hire to get rid of a problem. And beyond that, you have no need for him. That's why he lives with the normal people. That's why he's so cynical about all this grandized political stuff and the wars. Geralt knows that at the end of the day, that's just two kings having a fight with each other, and the normal people suffer. And they don't care which side of the border post they are. They just want to left in peace and deal with their farm. And because he is in so much in contact with those people and gets hired by them, and he sees the problems they deal with, that's why he can't identify with this holy war nonsense on the high level that the kings worry about, because he thinks at the end of the day, all you do is trample over a farmer's field, and he has to deal with it. That's all you do at the end of the day, and that's that's why this is special. That's why it speaks to the normal person. That's the everyday person that is sick of politics, because all these people do there is just make my life more miserable. That's what it speaks to, because that's what this is about. And I think Sapkowski, as someone that grew up in Poland, the country where people suffered from all kinds of stuff, from all kinds of wars and political turmoil and communism and all that other stuff, he probably knows, of all people, a Polish person that is his age probably knows that better than anyone. All this high political crap the normal people suffer. So that he writes that from that mundane perspective, from the perspective of the normal person and their lives, and doesn't care about this high grandized stuff, it makes total sense. Of course he would write it that way, because as a Polish person, he's not interested in the grand wars and saving the world. He's interested in what that does to the normal person. It leaves a wake of destruction. And a Polish person probably knows that better than most people in Europe. So yeah.
Well, I would also say that, as you said, like, it speaks to people because, like, it speaks to me because, like, I used to like, I didn't really want to go into this, but when I was younger, I pretty much read very much high fantasy books, stuff like that, and played those kind of games where you are the chosen one. And I like that because, like, it's a power fantasy. But as I grew up, I realized that I probably won't be chosen one in my world. So I'll be just one of the, like, millions and billions of people. So that's why when I discovered The Witcher, I really like that perspective that you are just one of the many, and
it's a more adult perspective on fantasy.
There's, I just like it more, the perspective of more, like, down to earth point of view of life and mundane stuff and stuff like that. But
and I think the Hexer show captures that pretty well. It shows normal people, even the soldiers are just everyday guys. Even people that try to challenge Geralt, they're just regular guys, just like the guy that wants to start a fight in a bar. You know these kind of people, and Geralt also knows them, and he knows how to deal with it, whether he should bother with them or just, whatever, go away. Because he's met plenty of those people, and sometimes it doesn't even bother him anymore because he just knows what people are like. There's not every conflict is going to be this grand epic thing. It's just, this guy's just an asshole. It's like, it's all mundane and normal and relatable. And I think that was also one of the first reviews that I read about The Witcher 1. That was one of the things they said. This is an adult fantasy world. That's thing that has a lot of reality about it. There's crime, there's people begging on the street, there's prostitution, there's all these things that we have in the real world, because that's just what life is like. And the chosen one, I mean, that only gets you so far in life. It's like, once you grow up, you know that you're not going to be the knight on the white horse, and the girls know that, they're not going to be the princess. And that's what in The Witcher, like, the men worry about whether they can still work on the farm next year, or whether the army is going to destroy everything again. They worry about, can I sell enough goods to feed my family? The women care more about getting birth control from the sorceresses and stuff like that, or whether they can feed their children, or whether their husband is still getting drunk and will beat them again tonight. It's like these normal people problems. It's not about, am I going to be the princess and am I going to be the big hero, because it's just not just doesn't work that way. Like, sure, if you play an RPG campaign, you're this adventurer that goes out in the world to just help people. But nobody ever asks, like, okay, yeah, where's the money coming from? Like, what are you going to pay the inn from? Like, this idea that after every adventure you find a big pot of gold and some chest somewhere with a whole bunch of stuff that finances this adventure is just unrealistic. That's not what life is works like. You need to figure out, okay, how that's also the way the books are written, and that comes across in the show as well. Geralt doesn't know whether he can afford a bed the next night. Like, he literally is always scraping for everything. He's happy when someone invites him to a party to make him an offer, even if he has no intention to take that contract. The fact there's a free meal in it means okay, I'm at least gonna listen because at least I'm gonna get a meal out of it. That's the kind of thing he worries about, and that's the kind of thing the normal people worry about. That's why the people haggle so much with him when they want to hire him, because they barely have any money to begin with. They basically can't afford him, but they also can't afford not even letting that monster roam around. So they kind of have to also pick the lesser evil of spending that money with him. So yeah, it's and that also explains why a lot of people hate witchers, because the people that hire the witchers are usually the ones that are in the most despair already and have very little to begin with, because if they had something, they would probably be a lord and would have some soldiers that could deal with a little bit of a drowner or whatever if it's not something too big. But the normal peasants that are actually suffering from these monsters that are not behind big city walls, they have barely anything to begin with. And then this witcher comes along and wants a whole bunch of money to help. That can sometimes feel, yeah, these guys are just profiting off of other people's suffering. And that can cause antagony is understandable. And that's all stuff that the the Hexer show just captures. It's even in the first one where they take away him from his parents, the mother is furious, but at the same time, yeah, he saved your husband, like, and he promised him something in return. Like, on the one hand, you can obviously understand the mother, on the other, the Witcher has made an agreement. So on the one hand, the Witcher is just doing his job. On the other, yet again, there's a peasant hating the Witcher just for doing what he does, because she's furious that he wants her son as a payment. This kind of conflict between the peasant and the witchers and stuff, that is really well captured in Hexer show. And in this mundane life, the worries of everyday people, I think the Hexer show gets that perfect, and that's why it's a much better adaptation. The Netflix stuff deals way too much with this grand stuff and completely forgets the normal people. Even the normal people, like, as I mentioned so many times, Marilka in the first episode, even she wants to be a witcher and this big hero and whatever. Normal people don't talk like that or worry about something like that. Just that's just not how that works. She's still stuck in the high fantasy, in the I'm the chosen one, I get to go on adventures. Geralt doesn't go on adventures. He sleeps out at night because he can't afford an inn and he has to sleep in the rain. It's not a glorious life, and it's never told like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So back to the point we started at, I just really wanted to stress out, because I'm just thinking about how to sort of connect this, but yeah, it's not that I don't like the like epic high fantasy and stuff like that. There are place for it, but I think
Absolutely, yeah.
that
But it's
Witcher,
a fantasy.
yeah,
It's a fairy tale. This is more close to home.
the Witcher is like, the Witcher books are not that, and that's why I like how ordinary and how different it is, like, from all the things you mentioned, how mundane it is and down to earth, even like visually, that separates this fantasy from all other fantasy projects, because like usually you have the, as I said, the Lord of the Rings approach, that everything needs to look epic, like there needs to be mountains in the background, like needs to look like New Zealand, Norway, Iceland, or I don't know, Scotland, something like that. And I like that the Hexer uses just the Polish countryside and Polish landscape and nature. That's pretty unique, and it just
Yes.
fits the world really well. And even like the castles, usually in high fantasy, you have these huge, unrealistic, almost physics-defying castles. In The Witcher, it's usually like medieval castles and realistic castles inspired by history and historically accurate.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that's
so
like why I like when in the Hexer show they bring in the realistic looks and they actually shot it in Poland because it needs to be that way. There's a place for high fantasy, absolutely. But this is, as you said, this is not that. And you need to get your branding right. Like copying something else is not not gonna make anybody interested in your product because you're just doing what someone else has already done. The Witcher
yeah,
is not that. The thing that made The Witcher special in the games and the show and everything that came out, why people attached to it was specifically because it was different.
yeah,
So, and the
yeah,
Hexer show gets that right.
yeah, definitely.
It doesn't
And
do it great, but it's at least doesn't go for the high fantasy.
yeah, and another point I want to mention kind of like connects to this because another thing high fantasy often does is this sort of epic music, like think let's say theme from Skyrim or even Lord of the Rings, right? It's very how to say it, heroic music, and it's very often orchestral music. That's like the even stuff like, if you know, Two Steps from Hell, that's sort
Yeah.
of that kind of fantasy music. That's very, I like it, like in some instances, but I think what I don't mind epic high fantasy. I don't have a problem with it, but I don't like one thing about it, and that is it takes up most of the fantasy genre. It's the most known genre in the like fantasy, so, or subgenre in fantasy. So to me, it became, at some point it became generic, and things we mentioned like the epic landscapes and stuff like that, the epic castles, like huge castles, stuff like in the Game of Thrones, you have the huge wall, ice wall, right? Or even castles like the, I don't know what is called now, but the castle where they have hole where they throw people in, and like, I don't know. Do you know Game of Thrones?
Enough to probably know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, never mind. It's not important. But yeah, I just don't like epic landscapes, huge castles, stuff like that. That's like it's in every fantasy essentially, and at some point it became generic to me. And so that's why I like this new approach of, it's not that The Witcher is only fantasy that does that, because there are different definitions of high and low fantasy, but yeah, I would consider The Witcher to be like low fantasy. So there's a whole subgenre of that, but The Witcher is, from what I've seen, one of the very few fantasy worlds that are like this, sort of down to earth and stuff like that. So um, yeah, what I wanted to mention with the soundtrack is that I love how, and this is something that the games did as well, how in the Hexer they use soundtrack with folk instruments, and it's very unique. Yeah, that's one thing, and then also I don't know if it sort of if you can feel it in the books, but I always like, if you've ever been to countryside, you know how peaceful it can look, and since Geralt spends a lot of time in the countryside, like you need some sort of peaceful music to sort of how to say it, to add to the atmosphere, and that's why I think the peaceful music really helps the Hexer show, because a lot of the time the characters spend, like in the episode that adapts the Edge of the World, they are in the countryside there. Like the songs, that's another thing. Since we are talking about the soundtrack, we need to point it out. Like the songs are amazing, played by Dandelion, right?
And
And
for those who don't know, he sings one song in the episodes, but he also sings basically a different song at the end of every episode, basically recapping it, the story of it. And so every episode ends with a song from Jaskier, which is amazing, and it adds a lot to it. And funnily enough, even in the games, there is never really a place where Jaskier sings, and where he does it's awful. In the Witcher 1. So, funnily enough, the Hexer is maybe the only adaptation with actually good bard songs from
yeah,
Jaskier.
to be fair, and I don't want to compare it too much, but like I like the songs in the Netflix adaptation. That's one of the few things I kind of like, but people often point out like fair critique, and that's that the songs in the Netflix show sound like pop songs, which is true in my opinion.
Yeah, the pop
It,
song problem is a little bit of an issue, and the lyrics of the first
yeah,
song,
they
Frost of
are
Winter, The Witcher,
really bad.
they
Like
they
this,
don't match the meaning at all.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
they're
definitely.
actually the opposite
Like
of what Dunline would sing.
I just mean they sound good, and
The
yeah, they
songs
are.
are fine, yeah. It's
But
just that the
whatever.
lyrics are a problem, and they don't
Yeah,
sound like bard songs.
yeah, definitely. It's not like sort of medieval style bard songs. That's all.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
there's plenty of people out there that I'm not even sure. Maybe they even played on a lute, but it definitely isn't a lute that is in a tune that would have been used back then. Why? There's even a guy on YouTube that is going into the history of guitarists that can play the lute perfectly.
mhm,
All that guy, let him play a song for you. He
yeah,
actually knows medieval songs. Like, if you tell him, play me something that a bard of the 13th century would have played, he will immediately have something for you. Pep that up a little bit, turn it into a great song, whatever. The Witcher 3 soundtrack is all the stuff from Parzival is
mhm,
the best example that you can make music with these old instruments and it's gonna be popular like crazy.
yeah,
Because people love this soundtrack. They go to concerts to listen to Parzival.
mhm,
So it's to gaming concerts. So I don't get it. Why make this weird modern song?
yeah,
The guy sings fine. The song is fine. It's just not. Yeah, it's not a bard song.
yeah. And I think they like not with the Jaskier songs, but with soundtrack itself. Netflix show tried to
Yeah,
sort of copy gaming the soundtrack from the games, but yeah, whatever. Um, I just like how it's still it's sort of different uh, than the soundtrack in the games, but it's still like it both in the games, at least in The Witcher 1 and in The Witcher 3, and in the Hexer show, there are folk instruments used for the soundtrack, which makes it just sound really unique in the
and it
fantasy
gives us
genre.
this. It gives it the locale. It makes you
Yeah.
feel
Like
like every time they go to North Africa, they play what's that instrument called? There's an instrument that is a very long ancestor of the modern guitar and lute.
mhm,
It sounds very similar to lute, but good or something like that. Like everybody knows. It's even popular today. So if you go to popular music from any Arabic region, you're gonna have that instrument in it,
mhm,
and it's used every time in movies, like the typical Sahara soundtrack. Basically, it's because it's an instrument that can play half or quarter tones that are in between the tones that are on our normal intonation that we use for modern instruments in the West. So just hearing those notes and how they're played immediately gives you a sense of, okay, yeah, I'm in that region, because that's the music from that region.
yeah,
So if you play the right instruments from, immediately gives you a sense of where you are, or certain instruments that immediately tell you, okay, I'm in Japan or
yeah,
somewhere in Asia at
yeah,
least.
definitely.
Why not use that for the Slavic region? I don't get it. You use it for every other region. Like, this area also has a specific sound to it. Why not use that?
Mm.
And that works, and that makes people also interested in the Witcher 3 soundtrack because they also use these instruments. I've seen so many people comment on that. It sounded interesting. It sounded
Yeah,
different. It made me
yeah,
interested in it, and it made me interested in the history and the region of this world, and made me interested in looking that up because it's unfamiliar to me. It's something different that makes me curious. If it's something I already know, it's not going to make me curious. So that's what a lot of people have commented, what drew them to this soundtrack. There's even a lot of composers online that react to music they've
yeah.
never heard before. They react to soundtracks, and they reacted to the Witcher 3 soundtrack, and they're super excited about every new instrument that they've never heard before. So it's interesting. It makes you excited about something. So using that to your advantage should be obvious, especially since it's super easy to find people that play these instruments because they're still popular today in folk bands. It's not like they're impossible to find.
Yeah, and
It's not like they're super rare instruments. No, they're still around. So
yeah, and that's the point I wanted to make with like the high fantasy and The Witcher is that how unique it is. You said it yourself that like if you hear like the same sound all the time in every kind of fantasy, it gets boring. And if you like hear something new that's specific to that local culture, it's very unique and interesting. So yeah, I definitely agree
But
with
I
that.
will say, even Lord of the Rings in high fantasy did a great job, at least in Peter Jackson's adaptation, to make you know where you are
Yeah,
because Rohan had different instruments and a different music than any other region had.
yeah, and
So,
it's true that like for Shire they use tin whistles, which is sort of an Irish thing, and it's sort of a like England vibe. So yeah,
exactly, yeah, that sounds more like Irish music. And if you move into Mordor, they use a lot of drums and stuff like that. So, yeah, you can absolutely use music to place you in a certain place. And in The Witcher, that just works. It places you in a certain mood, in a certain area that just feels different and places you in a certain place, and that is immediately recognizable. And I think they took advantage of that in the Hexer. Yeah, they made it feel typically Slavic and at home.
yeah,
And
I
they used
wouldn't
it to their
even
advantage. Not necessarily Slavic, but they
yeah
definitely made sure it doesn't sound orchestral high fantasy.
yeah I
They
would say
made it something different.
I would say just like folk music,
Yeah.
for music of the countryside. Yeah,
Exactly, yeah. Because it's also, as we said, this mundane thing. This should also be music that is played by the people in the tavern, not something
yeah,
where you need an orchestra.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's exactly my point with the high fantasy soundtrack. Yeah, but yeah, that's like, and with the soundtrack, I think it's I don't know, but I don't know if it's an important point to make, but I just love listening to it. I've been listening to it years for years now, and like because of how peaceful it is, I often like to replay it just to like get some relaxing music. And same with the Witcher games. And yeah, I don't know, but the Witcher Netflix show, to me the soundtrack mostly sounded like depressive music, and I just didn't like that. And I don't know, I just think that it's like a testament to like how great the soundtrack is, how much you want to replay it. And soundtrack from the Hexer I listen to all the time. So yeah.
yeah, for sure. And you also, I mean, everything depressing. They also use the standard blue dreary filter over every image, so
Yeah,
everything looks like that. At some point, if you shoot a normal Central European landscape, you don't
mm,
need to put a color filter over it. It's already going to look like the way it's supposed to look
yeah,
because that's just the way that looks. I mean, obviously, the Hexer show could have used a little bit post processing to make things a little pop a little bit more, but you don't need a whole lot of lighting changes because you already have the lighting it's supposed to be. It's supposed to look exactly like that.
yeah.
So
And
it's
I
like
didn't
I
even
don't get
like
it.
I also don't like how often they use like smoke machines in the Netflix show. Even like when Geralt is talking to Renfrey in a forest, they wanted to I guess make it look interesting. So they use smoke machine. So the
Yeah, but it never looks
forest.
realistic. It always
Yeah,
looks like fantasy fog. It never looks
yeah,
like real fog, which tells me these people have never seen, they've never camped out, they never seen what forest fog actually
yeah,
looks like. That doesn't whirl around like these weird clouds that move through it's a little small layer on the bottom. That's not this huge fog wall that comes rolling in or whatever. That's not what that looks like, dude.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
you see that maybe if you look out on the lake, you're gonna have a thick layer of fog maybe on there. But if you're in the middle of the forest talking to somebody, you're not gonna have these clouds of fog rolling in. Yeah, it always looks like fantasy fog. Yeah, it
yeah,
never looks like actual normal early morning forest stuff.
yeah. And it
Um,
all just looks desaturated, and
or that,
they
yeah,
they use
50,000
that a
color
lot.
filters over it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe like I think comparing Hexer and the Netflix show is really interesting, but at the same time I didn't really want to go into it because I think it would be interesting to make a separate video for it, but I don't know, let us
Yes.
know.
No, I mean, when you showed me, and maybe you can, depending on what media form this is gonna take, you can put something on the screen. But the
Yeah,
cosplay photos you showed me, those are obviously photographed with a normal camera, and the lighting on there and the landscape and the costumes, everything looked perfectly fine. That's also, as cheap as it is, I like it more when you do something that looks a little bit too mundane, like in the Hexer show with a low budget, but you shoot it in the area that it's supposed to be shot in.
Hmm.
Because sometimes when Geralt rides through the woods in that show, it's just that's
Yeah,
the Central
yeah,
European woods. I've seen places like that. Like I feel
yeah.
completely at home. Then
Or
doing
like,
something where you put 50,000 color filters over it, where it looks completely fantastical and not like a real place anymore. So
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think we got through all the points. Do you have any more things you liked about the show?
I think it's easy to summarize. If you're interested into a story where you actually fall in love with the characters and you care about what's happening and you don't mind so much that it's an adaptation that differs from the books, I think you'll enjoy the show a lot. And I've seen people watch it on YouTube when it was still there. You can still find it online with English
I mean, the
subtitles.
whole show, right?
The whole show, yeah. If you watch it, I've seen people watch it and enjoy it a lot, especially from North America. A lot of people really loved it, which shows that you don't have to Americanize everything to appeal to that target audience at
Yeah,
all. They love it. They love it actually the way it was shot, and some people cried in the end when he found Siri again and all that kind of stuff. So it totally worked. If you're too if shitty effects here and there and not the greatest costumes bothers you a little bit, then it's probably not going to be for you. But honestly, then Netflix show isn't for you either.
yeah,
But if you can look past that, if you can find the charm in it, and you don't mind some changes from the books, and you care more about the characters and their interactions, I think you're gonna get a kick out of it. It's definitely an adaptation. It's not a faithful one-to-one thing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but if you're looking for an adaptation where the characters are great and there's an interesting story to be told that I think has consistent themes and sticks with interesting themes, that at least even though it changed from The Witcher, it sticks with the same themes from The Witcher. It keeps the characters intact. It just tells a slightly different story with them. I think then you can enjoy it a lot, and I would
Yeah.
recommend googling online for it to find it. Maybe we can even put a link in the description where you can see it online.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely not a one-to-one thing from the
Well,
books. Even though I must say some stories are actually almost one-to-one, but definitely not all of them.
yeah, that's actually one thing I pointed out here in my list. I forgot about it, but you reminded me now that there's actually scenes like people often say like the Netflix show couldn't, of course, adapt it word for word, like one to one, but there are scenes
That
in
are
the
pretty
Hexer
much
show,
one-to-one, yeah.
yeah, and like I think it's bullshit argument. The way
You
like
can tell me about a novel, but a short story can absolutely be adapted
yeah,
one-to-one. There's no
and
reason why not.
and I'm not saying it's in every case, even in short stories, there are probably things you can't adapt like that, and you have to make changes. I don't mind that, as I said already.
Slight changes, but usually the justification is a novel is just way too long. If you want to adapt that into a movie, it would be 8-10 hours long.
But
That I understand, but a short story isn't. And a short story, if you read it out, usually has roughly the same runtime as an episode on TV. You absolutely can do that. Obviously, you need to make slight changes on how to portray things. You obviously can't just read out what a character is thinking. Something like that obviously doesn't make any sense, but from a pure, is everything that happens in this story represented on TV? Absolutely, you can do that. You can have every scene in there. You need to represent it slightly different, but you can absolutely have every scene in there, and the Hexer show is the proof of that, because especially the edge of the world is basically represented one-to-one.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention some examples. So that's the one, and also the end when Geralt meets Ciri. I don't know if the whole short story is represented in its entirety. Fuck, I don't know if
the only thing that isn't in there is the flashback that he has the memory with Yennefer at celebration of Beltane. But for example, the scene with his mother is in there. So not every feverish dream he has is in there, although he only has 2, I believe. No, he has a third one with Calante. So of the fever dreams, only 1 is in there. But although technically that wasn't even a fever dream, because later the guy confirmed that his mother was actually there. So, but the 2 memories he has, that's not in there. But honestly, for that story, that's also not needed.
Yeah, but anyway, the important point was that just watch the ending.
It's basically 1-to-1, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. Even people share it on the main Witcher subreddit as like a great example of how you can adapt the scenes 1-to-1 or word for word if it's possible. So yeah,
especially the emotional stuff. Like if you want to have a good representation of Geralt's and Ciri's meeting when he finds her again. In the Netflix case, you can't even say again because he finds her for the first time. Both in The Witcher 3 with the flashback scene and in the Hexer show, that is an emotional scene where they embrace each other on the field. In both, it works emotionally. I've seen people cry for both representations. In the Netflix show, they don't get that. So, and the reason why they could both get it right as a flashback in a game and as a one-to-one representation in a TV show clearly shows that justification just isn't real. You absolutely could have done that moment right because it was already done right. And it has the same emotional impact that it has in the books, arguably even more, because these actors are obviously real humans. They portray real emotions, so it connects to even more. As I said, the little girl actually does a great job. So yeah, this Geralt embracing her and being so desperate that he finally found her, that is an important moment. And you can't tell me, oh yeah, you couldn't represent that because you can never put that accurately on TV what you have in a book. That's complete nonsense. That's a stupid justification.
We can go back to how great Zebrowski is in the role of Geralt. Like this scene where he sees Ciri again, he just nailed. Watch the scene and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And even the scene right after when they're on their way to Kaer Morhen, the way he talks to Ciri and tells her to sleep and don't worry about it, like that the wolves are his friends when she hears them in the distance. You can totally tell that they have a father-daughter relationship right away. And unfortunately, again, we don't want to talk too much about the Netflix show, but that's the one thing that show never got right. In any of the seasons.
Yeah.
And the Hexer show gets that right. They don't even have that many scenes together, Geralt and Ciri, in that show. They basically have like 2 or something like that when he finds her and brings her to Melitele's temple, and then later again when he finds her again after losing her. There's not a whole lot of scenes there. They don't have a lot of screen time that actors are able to get this relationship across and his love for her and her love for him in such a few amount of scenes is absolutely amazing, and it proves that how incompetently it was done in the other adaptation.
And since we are already talking about the Netflix show, there's anyway something I wanted to ask you. First of all, what do you think about the reaction to the Hexer show? Do you think it's overblown, or what do you think?
Look, depending on what you expected, I can see why some people would be disappointed. If you watch the movie version first, yeah, that one is awful. Especially since it leaves all the most important character stuff out. The most interesting aspect of the show, even though that is a complete invention, Geralt's childhood and training is actually one of the more interesting parts of the show and one of the most enjoyable ones. I love the first episode and some parts of the second one, aside from the stupid teachers. But Geralt's development in the second episode is actually very interesting. I just don't like the stupid teachers. But I like the idea that two people get trained with him, and I always imagine those two guys as being Lambert and Eskel, even though they're not. It's, to me, if you cut the most cool thing out and then you leave this somewhat edited together mess, yeah, I can totally see how that completely puts you off. I mentioned it already. If you start with the Golden Dragon, which is arguably the most horrible effect of the show, maybe aside from the Striga, yeah, that just doesn't work. As a show, if you only watch the show, if you thought it was going to be a faithful adaptation, I can see why you're disappointed. You probably expected also a little bit higher production value. But if you get over that and you give the show a chance for what it is, I will argue the big difference between the Netflix show and this show is every change that was made, even if it's a change for the worse, in this show, I can understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to stitch it all together a little bit and give it a nice through line and give Geralt an actual arc and an interesting storyline for the first season. And I get not all those things worked out, but I could see what they were trying to do. In the Netflix show, I have no idea what they were trying to do. Nothing makes any sense, and it always changes things for the worse, and it's not even necessary. I can see why they made the changes in the Hexer show to turn a couple of completely disconnected short stories into an actual show that has a through line, that has a connected story. I can see that. It works for me for the most part. Most of the characters that had a role that got expanded, like Renfrey or Falvik, worked great for me. I love the actors and the way they portray those characters. I love Geralt's expanded storyline, even though it's a little nonsensical in some cases for the lore, but it works for me. It makes it interesting. So it tells a story that is interesting, that doesn't violate the scenes or betrays the characters. The characters are still the characters that I know. Falvik is still who he is. He just does a whole bunch more, but in the scene that he's in the books, he acts exactly the same, like this arrogant prick. Nenneke is the same, Geralt is the same, Dunderline is the same, Yennefer is the same, Renfrey is the same. Everybody works. Even the relationship, even Dudu as this quirky little guy, everybody works great. And that's the most important to me. They tell a slightly different story, but they tell it with the original characters, with their relationship towards each other, and with the original themes. Geralt and his inner conflicts, the way that humans can be the real monsters, that fate is not the only thing, that you need more than that. All that is fully intact. And that's the big difference to the Netflix show. They destroy everything. Every character is out of character. Every relationship is completely wrong, and the themes are turned into the exact opposite. And that's the big thing for me. Considering that, if you can look past the changes and you look into that, I think there's so much beautiful character stuff in there and such a nice story being told that I think calling it complete trash is a little bit unfair to it. It's a little bit cheesy, it's a little bit too low budget here and there, but hey, I mean, there's so many guilty pleasures that we all have, like some cheesy movie that is just totally silly, but it has that special something that makes us connect with it. I think
Conan
this
the
is one example
Barbarian.
for that. Yeah, exactly. The Conan the Barbarian is completely silly and stupid, especially with Arnold barely able to speak English. But it has just special something that just makes it great and special. And there are character moments that just work. And it tells an interesting story. And I think the Hexer show is exactly the same. It has great actors, it tells a good story, and it sticks. Even though it violates certain things from the books, it sticks to the themes and the characters from the books and doesn't completely character assassinate every single one. So Geralt is still Geralt. Like, people in Poland don't call Zabrowski their Geralt. for no reason, because he just is Geralt. He's in a slightly different story, but he's absolutely Geralt. And Jaskier is Jaskier and Yennefer is Yennefer. Sure, he doesn't wear just black and white, she wears red, but also a stupid choice that I don't like. But aside from that, she's totally Yennefer. She acts exactly like Yennefer is supposed to. So I get it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me like it, and that's why I think some criticism is going a little too far. Like, people are calling it a complete abomination. I don't agree with that. It's a
Yeah.
little disappointing and a little too cheap, but it's definitely not an abomination.
And I always felt that people just making fun of it, and like there's a point where it becomes sort of mean. I don't know, with the Netflix show I don't mind it as much because it's still considered by like the mainstream audience still like it, and it just took way too long for people to realize that how bad it is.
Yeah, and some changes in that show are actually mean-spirited towards its audience even, and to the original source material. So can at least see that the Hexer show at least respects its source material. I can't see that in the Netflix show.
Yeah,
the Hexer show respects its source material and tries to do something interesting with it.
Yeah, and my point was that I don't know, I just been to situations where like I was at this presentation, some guy had this convention about The Witcher when The Witcher 3 was coming out, and I don't know, he was just making fun of the Hexer show, and like everybody was laughing. Or there's this YouTuber who loves the books, so I like her because she's a big fan of the books, and I'm too. But she made this series where she sort of just made fun of the Hexer show, and I view these types of things as sort of kicking kicking someone who is down. Essentially, that's how I view it.
Yeah.
And
I never make fun of something that was honestly trying to make something good, and I clearly see that in the Hexer show. They didn't always succeed, but I think some of the changes they introduced, new scenes between Geralt and Dandelion that didn't exist in the books, or certain other things, are interesting and add something. His childhood episode is absolutely great, in my opinion. It's completely invented, but if I compare the newly invented stuff from the Netflix show and the newly invented stuff from the Hexer show, I take the Hexer show any day of the week. That episode with his childhood is so charming. His challenge in the woods and how he saves the wolf and befriends the wolves. I think, and that backstory, how he got the name White Wolf, it's completely invented, but it's awesome. I love that. It's almost in my fan canon that he got the White Wolf name that way.
Yeah, it's
And
sort
I
of
love
a
it.
cheesy thing, but at the
It's
same
charming.
time cool and charming. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And if someone takes a real try and really tries to respect the original and just doesn't succeed at every turn, I'm not gonna make fun of that. I'm gonna make fun of the one that thinks they know better and completely screw it up. And that's mean-spirited, that's stupid, that's arrogant, that's unrespectful. And when you then hear, oh yeah, we are actually making fun about the books internally, then I mean, sorry. I'm pretty sure that didn't happen on the Hexer set.
Yeah. There's also.
So I think that's mean-spirited and it's unwarranted. Yeah, that kind of fun making. I mean, most people that I met in Poland didn't make fun of it; they just were slightly embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sure, if it's a Polish production, you want people to be proud of it, and obviously, unfortunately, the show never got released internationally. Only the stupid movie got released internationally, and obviously, that's a horrible representation of it. And as a country, I can see how you're slightly embarrassed of that thing because that was obviously horrible. But I think making fun of it and being overly vicious about it, I think that's unwarranted. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is something I used to say that imagine the way the Netflix show right now is known throughout the world, and it sort of represents the Witcher brand in the world. And imagine that would be the Hexer. And right now the Hexer is considered by the majority of the fandom a joke and a failure and like abomination and stuff like that. So
I would say the most of the Polish fan base. I would
yeah,
actually say if you look online and you see people that have found the Hexer show, that have already seen Netflix, that
yeah,
haven't even read the books, most of those say, "Oh my god, like this is so
yeah,
much better."
yeah. And there is a point I want to get to, but to finish my previous point, just like I would criticize the Hexer show the same way. There are things that are really bad in the Hexer show. And if it would be the only thing or the main thing that would represent The Witcher worldwide, I would have a problem with it probably. It would be slightly better because I think the Hexer show is better than the Netflix show, but still, I wouldn't want this version to represent the Hexer as the main
Honestly,
thing.
there we disagree. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I don't know, but I just
Because to me, it sticks close enough to the themes and the identity of the characters that I think you could easily jump from the Hexa show into the games, for example, or into the books and not feel like you're reading completely different characters. With the Netflix show, that is absolutely the case. These characters have nothing in common at
yeah,
all.
I just
So to me, if someone can watch this and I tell them, okay, this is an adaptation, there are slight differences, and they fall in love with those characters, and then they go to the games and they see, oh yeah, these are totally these guys. Maybe with the exception of Dandelion because he's not well represented in the games, but uh, that works. And as long as that is an introduction to the characters that might have slightly different story to them, but they're still, if you love these characters here, you're gonna love them in the originals. That's fine for me. I start having a problem with something representing the brand if you completely change everything around and you every theme, every character is completely different and sometimes the opposite of what they're supposed to be, then I have a problem with the representation. In my opinion, the Hexer show doesn't do that.
yeah, and to be fair, I would say that if people would make the same arguments they used to make about the Netflix show before everybody understood that how bad it is, like they used to defend it so hard and used to make these arguments that yeah, of course it needs to change things and stuff like that. So if they would make arguments like that for the Hexa show, I think it would be considered
A
it would
masterpiece.
yeah, it would be as well regarded as the Netflix show was
Absolutely, yeah.
after the release of the first season, let's say. And so yeah, I think there's
And you can't even argue with the, oh yeah, higher budget, it looks better and whatever, because quite honestly, yeah, the costumes and the effects in which are especially in the first season also look absolutely like crap.
hmm,
So you can't even argue that point.
yeah, yeah, I just
And
think
people
there's
made people made defenses for that in the first season also. Oh yeah, they tried this and that and whatever. It doesn't matter so much. Yeah, well, if you've defended there, then you have to defend it for the Hexer.
yeah,
So
yeah, I think there's just a weird double standard where the Polish version is like ridiculed and made fun of endlessly, and the Hexer, I wanted to say the Witcher show, Witcher Netflix show is sort of before all the stuff came out about like writers making fun of the books and then Cavill leaving and stuff like that, and the second season completely ruining like Eskel and or was it the
yeah, Eskel, yeah.
Eskel? Yeah. So uh, yeah, before that people loved the show, and I don't know, it just seems
Yeah,
like
mostly because of Henry Cavill, but again, they like Zabrowski also. So the main actor that plays Geralt has not been the issue in both adaptations. Let's put it
yeah.
that way. And to me, the formula is actually, at the end of the day, very, very simple. I look at both shows and I ask myself the following question: does it tell a story that I enjoy with characters that I fall in love with? The
Hmm.
Hexer, yes. Netflix, that's the only criteria that at the end of the day really matters to me. You can adapt something and I might not agree with certain changes, but if I enjoy watching it and I still fall in love with the characters, you did something right. Hexer
Hmm.
did that. I fall in love with these characters every single time and I don't even understand what they're saying. I have to
Yeah.
read the subtitles.
Yeah.
Netflix show, sorry, it doesn't happen. I hate these characters, every single one. Don't hate Geralt, but I don't fall in love with his representation either. So it just doesn't work for me. I hate Jennifer in that adaptation. I hate Jaskier in that adaptation. I don't like watching it. Almost want to throw something against my screen every time I try to watch it. So that to me is the biggest thing. You can adapt something and have low budget and shitty costumes. At the end of the day, bad movies become guilty pleasures because we connected with something, we fell in love with some characters, and we just enjoyed the story for some reason. Some movies are even intentionally bad to be this kind of cult fan thing that
Yeah,
makes
you
kind of
mean
fun of itself.
like The Room
Um,
or something?
yeah, something like that, or even something like Tremors, which is kind
Yeah.
of making fun of so many stereotypes in these kind of monster movies, but it's just an awesome movie somehow.
Yeah.
So it's, even though it kind of makes fun of its own genre the entire time, it's something you can connect with. And I've seen people connect with the Hexer show so many times, and even under the comments under some video where they found it saying, "Oh my god, this scene with Siri made me so emotional. Why didn't Netflix do that?" That's the thing. If you don't have these emotional connection, what's the point? So that's the only criterion that at the end of the day matters to me, because at the end of the day, movie, book, whatever, TV show, at the end of the day, we're telling a story. And if you don't tell the story in a fun way, then what are you doing? I don't care what your costumes look like. If you don't tell me a story that I can fall asleep to, I put it back to Geralt and Ciri and the Dryad in the forest, where he tells her the bedtime story. At the end of the day, that's what stories are all about. And if your child doesn't fall asleep because the story is so great, but she falls asleep because the story is crap, then you have a problem. Then I don't care what else you did with your thing. You haven't told me a bad story. I care about whether you tell me a good story. And Hexer tells a good story, and Netflix doesn't.
Okay. I just wanted to say I care what your costumes look like. So yeah.
Yeah, but not if the story is crap. Then the costumes don't
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah, no, it's just I'm joking, but essentially it's problems
Yeah, of
on
course. That only makes the story better.
different levels, right?
Yeah, my point was the story needs to be there first. Everything else is an add-on. If your story is crap, nothing will save you.
Yeah, definitely. There's one hopefully last point, because this is very long. We will probably need to cut it down. But there's one thing that people started saying when the Netflix show came out, and especially the second season, and people started criticizing it. I've seen people share the Hexer show on the main Witcher subreddit, and especially the scene where Geralt finds Ciri again, and which is very touching. Yeah. And people started saying, "Oh my god, like it's like with Star Wars, where people started saying that after the sequel trilogy was so bad, people started saying that the prequels are good now." And here with the Witcher Netflix show, they started saying that the Hexer is good now. And I just want to say that I see this argument as bullshit, because I liked the Hexer show way before the Netflix show came out. But I wanted to get your take on it. What do you think? Do you started liking the Hexer show only because the Netflix show was so bad?
No, and I think that's a flawed argument, because the reason for both is very simple. It's exactly what I just said. The prequels told a good story in a slightly bad way, but the story was solid. The story was always solid. It's just had shitty effects and some really bad acting and some bad editing and way too much green screen here and there, but it told a good story. And that's why people like now the prequels more once they saw the sequels, because they now recognize, yeah, those movies were not the greatest, but at least they told a great story that fit with the lore and the characters, and they didn't throw everything out the window. I mean, you can argue with Darth Vader being the one that built 3PO or some stupid shit like that, but at the end of the day, the main story was good and you connected with the characters. That's what matters. You cared about Obi-Wan Kenobi. You cared about what happens to Anakin, and you were interested in Padme and their relationship and all that kind of stuff, and how the Republic fell. That's the difference. George Lucas still told a great story. He had not the right team around him to make that into great movies, but the story was still good. The sequels wasn't, and that's exactly the same with the Hexer. People like the Hexer now better because they recognize, yeah, it didn't look great, and some stuff was shit, and they changed a lot around it. But at the end of the day, at least Geralt was still Geralt. That's the main difference. The characters are right, and the story is good, and that's the difference. The sequels for Star Wars and the Netflix show have grandized epic budgets and they look epic, but at the end of the day,
Very
they
shallow.
tell a still a shit story, and
Yeah.
that's what people recognize in both the Hexer show and the prequels. Yeah, they weren't great, but at least the story was good. I could still enjoy the story watching those. It's like someone telling you a joke and he doesn't get the delivery quite right. Well, the joke is still funny. You could tell it better, but that's the difference. It's the difference between a good joke told bad and a bad joke.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's most people have it like this, that they started recognizing that the Hexer show wasn't so bad. I really think that the Hexer show could stand on its own if people
I do
would
so as well.
give it proper chance and didn't start hating it right at the beginning with the golden dragons and stuff like that. Yeah, that's.
I think what people recognize now is an aspect of modern film and TV making. Back in the day, most stuff at least told a somewhat good story. The difference between movies and TV show was usually, yeah, this is super low budget, this is crap. But the story was still usually solid. It was just not as enjoyable to watch as others because others just told it better. Nowadays, in the last 10, 20 years, we have a lot of movies and TV coming out that is just complete crap. It tells a completely awful story because people think they just need to put a bunch of explosions on the screen and people are going to suck it up. And now people recognize, you know what? Maybe those had bad budget back then, but at least they were still telling a story. And I think that's what people now recognize with all this new stuff coming out. That back in the day, yeah, it was still, I mean, you can still criticize the prequels and you can still criticize the Hexer for what it doesn't do right.
Yeah.
But at least it's still telling a story that is fun. That used to be the case for most things. Now it isn't anymore. And that's why people now suddenly realize, oh, things could have actually been worse because now they are worse. I don't think that makes them look at things back then as better than it was because it still isn't good. But it still tells a good story that is enjoyable. And people recognize, okay, at the end of the day, that is actually what counts.
Yeah.
And I think that is a revelation to people because they took that for granted.
Yeah, perhaps. And I think that's a good note to end on. If you want to listen to us ramble on for hours, we want to do like podcast together and perhaps even with more people. So this was sort of a taste of that. And yeah, we'll let you know when we'll start uploading it to somewhere.
Yeah, we hope you catch us there. And the podcast is always going to be fun. I mean, there's people watching people restore and watch online for an hour. So I think we have a good chance to find some people that are interested in listening to us ramble on about some fun Witcher stuff.
I just want to add something here at the end regarding our podcast we want to start releasing. It's usually Andreas who's leading the conversation there, so it's easier to listen to it. This wasn't the best representation of the podcast because I was the one who was trying to steer the conversation and always introduce the next point, but because it takes me so long to express myself, I know that this was hard to listen to. My point is just that the podcast we are working on should hopefully be better and easier to listen to, because it's Andreas who mainly leads the conversation there. So yeah, thanks for listening if you've got to this point, and see you next time.